Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the cybercriminals are hiding in the conversation. Cybercriminals use social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified these 13 types and shows you how you can protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. SOC analysts are often overworked and underappreciated. In fact, many consider leaving their jobs or changing careers altogether. Devo is hosting the second annual SOC Analyst Appreciation Day to pay some long overdue kudos to analysts and encourage organizations to improve their job satisfaction and mental well-being. Join Devo and other cybersecurity industry professionals on October 19th for sessions and panels focused on de-stressing, SOC career development, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/Devo to register. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. You can subscribe to all of our podcast feeds, have all new episodes downloaded right to your device. You can join our mailing list, Discord server, follow us on social media, and get the latest on our streaming platform so you can tune into the show live. Also, there's a link there for an episode starter pack or multiple starter packs, which are Spotify playlists of some of our favorite and most memorable episodes and segments. With that, on to the stories for this week. I think we...
Wait.
I'm getting there. Everyone, don't get your panties in a bunch. I wanted to start with Jeff's story number 1 for an update on Hannah.
Yep.
Yes.
So I'll give the update. One of the main reasons why I haven't been around for the last couple months is last December, my granddaughter Hannah, 13, she felt a little lump in her throat and went to her mom looked at it and said, "Oh, we need to go to urgent care." Urgent care x-rayed it and said, "You need to go to the emergency room." Emergency room did an MRI. "You need to go to the really good hospital up in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins." And so we went up there, and at some point somebody said, "Has anybody talked to you, mentioned cancer to you yet?" Turns out she was diagnosed with cancer. So she went through 6 months of chemotherapy, and I am more than happy to say that she came through it and is cancer-free.
Woohoo!
But it's been a nightmare last 9 months or so for all of us. And today happens to be her birthday. I know it's poor, privacy issues.
OPSEC.
Poor OPSEC. But it's her birthday. And since she's on technology, she found us on YouTube, and she's been chatting with us on the YouTube channel. So hi, Hannah.
Hey, happy birthday, Hannah, and I'm glad we have good news on that front.
Raise a glass.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Raise a
Cheers.
glass.
Happy birthday, Hannah.
Raise a glass of age-appropriate beverage.
Let's not ever think about 13 again.
Yeah. Well, good news on that
We've
front,
all
like
been,
I said.
we've all been following very closely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, so what do you guys, I haven't been around, but every once in a while I hear, we were talking about Hannah on the show. So thank you, everyone, for all the support. Prayers, warm thoughts. We had a GoFundMe page out for a while, and a lot of people in the community rallied around that, which was there's just, there's insurance, but then there's all the extra stuff that insurance doesn't cover, like bourbon, for instance.
Bourbon for grandpa.
Not
For
for
sanity's
grandpa.
sake, let's be clear.
For sanity's sake.
For
So
grandpa.
just thank everybody for the support, and I am hoping to have Hannah come with me at a future hacker conference, because there's so many people that want to meet her. I don't think she knows how many people.
Her reputation
are behind
precedes her.
That's right. So
I
She's
think I
a
speak for
celebrity.
everyone when we say "fuck cancer."
Mm-hmm.
amen, and drink
Yeah,
to that.
you
again,
you
too.
hacked cancer. Well done.
Bravo, kid.
Yes, she did.
And the biggest part, congratulations on your 14th birthday. Hope you got to do some cool stuff and got some cool stuff from Grandpa, right?
She ironically.
Oh, don't put him on the spot, Larry. Jesus.
It's to come, because I've been on the road, but she.
Gifts in the mail.
I did bring her home a cool conference shirt, and I called her earlier today just to wish her happy birthday, and we're wearing the same shirt.
Nice.
Yeah.
Circle City Con,
Saturday morning cartoons, right?
Saturday morning cartoons.
Awesome.
Yep.
You're also dating yourself with Saturday morning cartoons, for
Yeah.
the record.
Well,
Well,
Seriously?
you know,
What?
people were
What
saying,
do you
I'm
mean?
so looking forward to reminiscing about 80s and 90s cartoons. I'm like, excuse me, what about the 60s and 70s cartoons? And
Hanna-Barbera.
then I realized they're all racist and misogynist. We can't bring up any of them. So,
Yeah, Rocky and Bullwinkle were awesome. All right, slow down.
They were, but not a whole lot of Looney Tunes can we talk
Squirrel.
about anymore. Anyway,
we can't talk about stories.
we can talk about the news.
Because we get a lot of
Related stories. I'm looking. I have to look at all the stories in PPWorks.
Yeah.
Because despite the number of times you click update show notes, it does not appear to actually update the show
Yeah, you should
notes.
talk to the developer about that.
Oh, wait,
which isn't
maybe,
me.
maybe because I'm looking at the wrong page, but I
Isn't
could be
me
wrong
anymore.
on that. Wait.
Interesting.
Oh, you know why? Because the page that I'm looking at is says episode number 756. That the link to the external show notes is 758.
What is it? This is 758.
It's
Yes.
756.
This is
756.
758. No, this is 758.
Well,
Oh shit.
all the stories get added for me for a 756 because that was the most recent one that was at the time when I was in PPWorks. was
Oh,
dated
that's what
today.
PPWorks came up with.
Yep, and in
Hey,
fact,
that says September
when you
21st.
look at PSW 756, it's dated September 21st, which is
Today.
There be bugs in the system. Anyway,
yeah.
well, we
And-
have a lot of stories to talk about, and this is episode 758. Where do you guys want to start? I have 21 stories.
Oh God, and
Are they the ones on the 756 page, or do I need to refresh?
I don't know. I'm in
they are
PPWorks,
on
man.
the 756 page on the website. They are on the 756 page in PPWorks.
I'm so confused. Just
Seriously?
name a story and I'll wing it.
Paul, your number one story is the blind spots of Bloodhound, correct?
Correct.
All right, so yeah, 756 it
All
is.
right, share that in Slack with whatever link you have to that, Larry.
This is
Yep.
show 756, Paul.
Yeah. Is it? Anyway,
It is.
I want to get to talking about stories. I don't care what episode it is. The blind spots of Bloodhound.
And I just threw that out there to just make sure that we were literally on the same page.
Yeah. So I mean, this article really digs into some of those areas where Bloodhound isn't necessarily going to cover on these particular access vectors, if you will, for lack of a better term. So he says they represent real paths of escalation, and these situations are the same password, which really what I think he's talking about there is shared accounts where multiple users know the password to one account, and enumerating that can be somewhat difficult, according to the article. The same admin password. This is where admins have admin accounts, but multiple admins are using the same password, which can be difficult, according to the article. What he describes as the guest machine. When I read that, he really means like control of the hypervisor. So if you control the hypervisor, you control the guests on the hypervisor, and that is like a trust relationship that like there's no graph in Bloodhound for. I guess was his point. And if you provide updates to something, and those updates are trusted, to me that's like a supply chain thing, which is really kind of hard to graph out. So I don't think it wasn't a knock on Bloodhound. It was just like you have to consider these other relationships that you could visualize as graphs the way Bloodhound does, but that's not included in Bloodhound.
I mean, you look at graph math theory, and Andy and Will and I have had a lot of talks around like how this works. The ability for the mathematical equations to work out and how much you can evaluate from a visualization standpoint inside of Active Directory. Bloodhound is very specifically Active Directory focused, and it takes very specific edge cases. You have edge nodes that have specific parameters in which it's evaluating.
Tyler,
You
sorry,
can't
your
expand
volume
on-
seems kind of low.
You can expand on the edges of Bloodhound in a lot of the scenarios in which attacks are chained together. If you're looking at Active Directory, you start to unroll different things where you have members inside of members, nested members, or you're looking at stuff outside of Bloodhound or Active Directory. Has physical access.
Yeah.
Is a great example of that. Or if you're looking at things like direct memory access, or are we looking at things outside of Active Directory, devices that are not managed by Active Directory, hypervisors are a great example that are Active Directory integrated, or maybe Azure AD. all of these pieces fall into an attack chain of some sort. So the ability for Bloodhound to do its job very well, it does a great job, but it is only evaluating the edge nodes within inside the graph math theory to a certain extent. Otherwise, it would spider in such a way that it was unusable data. So people have to understand the tool set and understand what the tool uses are. When you're talking about tool tiering accounts and Active Directory and the Azure AD point, groups and nested group memberships becomes a nightmare. Then you talk about ACLs and DACLs. Active Directory, access control lists.
I think that's what he
all
was.
All those things come into play.
I read his article, Tyler, and it's what you're saying, right? He was like, Bloodhound is great. I'm not knocking Bloodhound, but I think it was more of keep in mind as a tester that this is what Bloodhound does, and here are some other cases, right? That you should know your tools, and that was essentially what he was saying too, Tyler. Yeah.
You should always know your tools.
Exactly. I mean, it's a good article that shows some of the gaps, and this isn't even. I would say this is barely touching the tip of the iceberg of some of the gaps of Bloodhound. Bloodhound is very recursive, very dynamic, and extensive in the things that it evaluates from its edge node evaluations. But it is very, very limited. Active Directory is such a dynamic and deep. It's a directory at this point. So all of those edge nodes becomes very, very key in what you evaluate for Active Directory security, and that goes well past Bloodhound. So use this as a tool in your tool set, but also realize there's 1,000 other ways that attackers are going to abuse Active Directory, and not only Active Directory, but all the correlations and integrations that Active Directory relies on for identity, access management, and controls for those things.
Speaking of Windows and pen testing, Praetorian had a great post on developing a virtual file system that emulates a Ouroboros rootkit, but this isn't a technique specific to a rootkit. The way I understood this was you're basically creating a virtual file system and encrypting it and using that to evade detection and store data. And there was volatile and non-volatile. So some of these file systems were created in memory. One was created on disk. And it was really a way to maybe persist, perhaps, but also hide that persistence in a virtual file system. I'm not sure like how endpoints, how detection works in this particular sense.
It's very difficult to, so you've got a couple places that EDR, endpoint detection, logging, all of those things are going to come into play here. You start to think about stuff off of the disk. Registry is a great example. People call that, diskless persistence or off disk. It's still a file. It still has something in there, but it's a file inside of a file, right? You're basically nesting files. There's a bunch of ways to do this. There's a bunch of techniques to do this. This is one of those same things, mounting a virtual file system that's read-only as part of a VMS storage. All of those things are part of that. This is a very unique technique that was used by one of the APT groups back in, I believe, 2018, and it was part of one of the kits, Ouroboros, I believe, was one of the rootkits that was leveraging this particular technique. But it's a way in which you're not going to see, or your EDR is not going to have visibility because it's not touching the physical disk that is on, and it's mounted in such a way that it is utilizing file space or memory space outside of the visibility of the operating system. Now, it is still mounted, it is still accessible to that via VFS, but because it's outside of the normal operating procedures of most of the operating system, the ability to hide your shellcode, hide your rootkit, have your rootkit hide whatever files are living in the VFS, it's an additional layer of obfuscation from the EDR and defensive tools.
But you say outside the operating system, though, Tyler. I mean, you still have to interface with the kernel to create and access these files.
You do, right? You're leveraging a rootkit, right? So you're leveraging a driver in which it has the ability to hide that VFS from the kernel because it's operating at ring 0. Anything operating at ring 0 as a driver has the ability to tell the kernel and the OS, which is typically userland and ring 0. It's telling it what it can and cannot report on and can and cannot see or access.
So it's a kernel-level rootkit that's hiding a file system, essentially.
Correct. You're using symlinks to kind of hide a lot of that exposure to the EDR or defensive tools, which often operate at userland with hooks. So just another method, and was well used by Tarula. It was a Tarula driver loader, which obfuscates one of the PE headers as part of its loading of the driver into kernel-level rootkit space. So it's,
but what's
interesting
is Praetorian re-implemented this and called it
Yeah.
Interactable Giraffe. Was their name for it, which I think is hilarious.
Jeep,
But
Jeep,
they
Jeep
basically-
Flea Market. You're picking all from all those names.
Did they open source it?
Yes, they did. It's got a GitHub page. I think this is a lot of people are going to say this is kind of, we'll call it irresponsible, but we need to bring more awareness to what kernel level rootkits, which have been around since
A long
Jeff's time. So these rootkits are available and have the ability to hide. So when we're talking about EDR, we're talking about the defensive tools in place. Like, we really have to understand what their capabilities are, how they're able to detect things at ring 0 once that happens, because we have a number of ways to get to system level or ring 0 through unfixable Microsoft and Linux escalation paths. So this is not exclusive to Microsoft. In fact, many of the toolkits have implemented this in a Linux kernel functionality level, and it is well known, well used, and not just Linux, OS X, Mac OS, all of them are vulnerable. So really getting the awareness out there, I think, is very important, so that people don't rely on that single pane of glass, single tool. We're leveraging that defense in depth and that maturity level where we have multiple points of visibility and detection in order to detect these kind of things.
It's funny you should mention my age, Tyler, because I was thinking what you were describing sounded a lot like what we used to do on early Windows systems, which I believe was a FAT file system, but there was a way to
Yeah.
hide file systems there. In the Unix days, we just created directories that were ... That was the name of the directory, and nobody ever knew to look for that.
Look for it. Yeah.
Magic.
True.
Yep.
Or what was it? You created a directory called like dot space
Yep.
or
You could
space.
do that. Space
Yeah.
dot.
Space dot. Space rogue.
Space rogue.
We'll continue down the Microsoft train. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint will turn on tamper protection by default. I think it's interesting in the context of our kernel discussion, because when I read what this does, like, basically it makes the system doesn't allow the user to tamper with Defender and disable your Microsoft Defender antivirus, right? But I'm like, does that really prevent an attacker that's in the kernel from changing these? We just talked about, like, kernel. Could I load something in the kernel that would change these, that would get around the tamper protection? I would assume the different privilege rings, at some privilege level, you have to be able to work with these settings, right?
You have to be able to work with these settings. A lot of these are going to be leveraging things like the Microsoft Sandbox, and these are O365 settings. So if the tamper protection does get disabled, then even if you're at kernel level 0 and you're able to disable that tamper protection, you're going to set off an alert or have a behavioral or a heuristic level alert or log triggered for that event. So while it doesn't fix a lot of the issues, if I can manipulate that tamper protection, shut it off, make my implant move off and laterally, change computers, at that point, now I've kind of escalated through the environment. So your time to detection, time to remediation really comes into play there, so that it doesn't matter whether you do it or not. It's how fast do you detect me, and can you remediate that quick enough to make a difference? It is good because it provides some visibility to most customers, and by default, that's huge. But it also allows those local administrator accounts that often are not protected properly by LAPSUS or some other mechanism. It doesn't allow those to abuse that local administrator privilege in order to turn that tamper protection off and just get right around your Microsoft.
So it does raise the bar.
It does raise the bar. It's not again, defense in depth, multiple avenues of mitigation and detection.
What else? We want to debate open source software. Who wants to debate open source software security? Anyone?
Ooh, see, I was hoping for one other one that you had in the list.
Oh, 3D printed steak?
Nope, no,
Okay,
it
not
was where did it go? Your story number 12.
12. We're jumping all the way to 12.
Yeah.
Oh, 12 was right up your alley, Larry.
It was.
Tesla hackers have found another unauthorized access vulnerability. So researchers at IOActive basically create the, what do they call this attack?
NFC relay.
Yeah, relay attack.
Relay-based attack.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, essentially, and this has been done with other key fobs, right?
Yep.
So you have someone with a transceiver standing near the car. You've got the owner of the car with the key fob, or in this case, an NFC,
NFC card. Yep.
And then the attacker B, if you will, clones that transmission or clones the data from the key fob, transmits it to the transceiver that receives it, and then transmits it to the car.
And for the record,
that's a relay.
And for the record, a transceiver is one that both transmits
and receives. Right.
Yeah, and arguably, it's not even a clone. It's I'm going to read at this point in time and immediately relay the data to be replayed by another endpoint that can also speak that same technology.
Yet another example of exploitation of trust.
Yep. The interesting that I thought the thing that I found with this article is that where was it? They talk about radio relay based attacks and so forth, and they basically said, but this isn't radio. Yeah, it is.
What?
It's radio. It's NFC.
Is it a sine wave flying through the air?
It is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not.
It's modulated. It's not radio.
Yeah, it's
Specifically, it's the custom firmware modifications that allow a Proxmark RDV 4.0 device to relay NFC communications over Bluetooth/Wi-Fi using Proxmark's Blue Shark module.
Yeah, effectively, what you're doing
Definitely
here.
not radio.
Yeah, it's definitely not radio. But I mean, Tyler, even at the base technology, when you're talking NFC, it's fucking radio.
Standard radio, nonetheless.
Right, and standard radio. And this was an interesting one that we talk about.
Does it
in the
have an
wireless class.
FCC ID?
It does.
It
Transmitter.
It is radio transmission.
Is that what we're using for the
a basis here? Yeah. Wi-Fi is not radio, though, according to some of the courts of law. In any case, these are some known things about being able to interact with Tesla over NFC and some of the key fobs and so forth. And they were initially found to be using DST-128 as an encryption method, and it was found to be broken, so they updated it to DST-256, which was also broken. But that's as far as they could
twice as broken.
But that's as far as they could go in the hardware in the vehicle. And if you moved from 128 to 256, and it may have been 64 to 128, I apologize. I'm doing this by the seat of my pants. You had to update your.
You're wearing pants.
I was going to say, which is weird because he's not wearing.
No,
pants.
I just brought the seat of the pants. I just didn't. I didn't bring anything
Is
else.
that like Daisy Dukes? Is that just the seat
I
of the
thought that was a new tat.
It is.
It's to
Daisy
fill in the assless chaps.
Redundant. Chaps are assless by definition. But in order to update the key fob, couldn't be updated. In order to update the key fob to support the new security methods, you had to buy new key fobs.
Right.
And they weren't cheap. This attack is pretty novel, either way.
Novell was the operating system.
Whole different thing.
And novel is a book. The part that makes this attack interesting is by using some hardware we've been using for a long time to basically relay that attack using a different hardware. We've had relay attacks for NFC using older Android devices with custom firmware. The fact that they're doing it with these non-old NFC devices that can implement better methods such as DST-128 and so forth is really cool.
There's a video of them executing this attack, which is pretty cool.
Yep.
Like if you ever want to see a relay attack in action, I thought it was a really great example.
Yep. And this one, the relay attack is not limited by distance, potentially. It's limited by the actual sort of latency of that network.
You could transmit this. So what you're saying is you can transmit this signal in the protocol over very long distances.
Right. So your Proxmark locally connected to Bluetooth to a device that is connected to Wi-Fi, that is connected to the internet, that has the ability to connect to another Wi-Fi enabled device that is connected to another Proxmark over Bluetooth.
Right. So you could get this go over long.
Anywhere the internet reaches.
Right.
Right.
And are there other factors that would make it not work in that scenario, or?
I wouldn't be surprised if there's some timing-based stuff in the relay. I haven't dug into the DST security method enough, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Tesla has some timeout values for being able to read the NFC stuff.
Like, do the codes cycle like a garage door kind of thing?
There may be some cycling based on time, but again, we start looking at some of those other attacks that we've seen recently against some of the rolling code type of stuff in modern automobiles, and the timing for the rolling code stuff is not great.
Gotcha.
So
Oh, did you guys hear that Uber got hacked?
what?
What?
Shocking!
No way.
Oh.
Didn't you guys? How could you couldn't? It's one of those ones you could not see, right?
Which is what started the whole discussion over the weekend about weak passwords and trust.
Mhm. And timely based on our earlier segment with Barracuda about MFA fatigue.
Right. That was the. Was it an MFA fatigue attack that got them in? Well,
that was
social
correct.
engineering.
It was a social
Then
engineering attack.
MFA.
Yeah, but social
fatigue.
engineering. My understanding was social engineering combined with MFA fatigue, in that the attacker just spammed one person and basically said, "Add my device, add my device, add my device, add my device, add my device," and they weren't responding. So they found that user on Telegram, sent them a message, and said, "Hey, I'm from IT, and I'm trying to send a message to your device to add a new one. Can you please answer it?"
Well, it was WhatsApp.
Sorry,
WhatsApp.
Sorry,
It
WhatsApp.
was
So the
My bad.
Telegram channel was where LAPSUS,
My bad.
which is a supposable hacker group that's operating this.
What do you mean
is
supposed hacker group? Is it not a hacker group? It
All right,
either
so
is
I
a
mean-
hacker group or it's not. Tyler.
No. They could be a script kiddie group.
They
Oh.
could be a skid group. I mean, let's go with that. But like LAPSUS, the ones supposedly responsible for
uh-huh.
the NVIDIA hack, the Microsoft hack. There was a couple others. I mean, so Grand
Rockstar
Theft
Games?
Auto,
Were they Rockstar Games too?
Rockstar Games. Yes, they're claiming the exact same thing. So the same handle was validated its use. However,
Is that Teabag? What's his name?
yeah, there's some feedback. So
Is it- no, it wasn't Teabag. It was, what was it? T something.
no, I mean it's Teapot. Teapot is the
Teapot.
Telegram channel.
Teapot.
that a lot
But
of
but
this-
that's where you put your tea bags.
But this, but hold on. But this says the threat actor claims to be the same hacker named Teapots. Is that not true? Is the Telegram channel called Teapots and the hackers?
So that's one of the
name?
hackers' handles.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's not the only one, but yes, that is one of the handles that is being leveraged. However, there's a lot of skepticism and a lot of attribution issues with LAPSUS in general and how LAPSUS is like conducting themselves from a smoke and mirrors. What was handed to them for NVIDIA, like there was creds leaked on Genesis that were very conveniently handed that had a very specific vulnerability in NVIDIA. On this particular one, like we have very little attribution available. We have known actors and handles in Telegram that can be traced to both the Grand Theft Auto source code leak and the Uber leak, which again, you look at a lot of the failures with inside of Uber, it wasn't just the fact that there was MFA fatigue. It was the fact that there were
credentials in a
leaked
PowerShell
through-
script on an open.
Well, yeah,
Sure.
I mean, there's two
there's
discussions
that.
to have here.
Mhm.
And, let's keep going with the initial access, but then what happened once they got
Right.
that foot in the door?
So initial access is from some Stealer code that is Raccoon. There's a few different Stealer codes out there that steal credentials from your browser or from off of your system. That was posted, leveraged, and leaked. Now, how those credentials were initially accessed on those devices for the MFA fatigue, in which valid credentials were leveraged, is yet to be determined. And
But hold
so,
on,
again,
I'm fascinated with the why. Like, if you've got Stealer malware and you steal those credentials, why would you just post them willy nilly to the internet? Why would you do that? Do you not
why
know
were
what you
they
have?
posted, or why were they stolen, or
Is this
who-
No, why
was
would you
using
post?
them?
Why would you post them willy nilly?
Yeah, why would you? Why?
a lot of those stealers automatically upload to things like
Oh,
Genesis
okay.
or
I
there's
gotcha.
APIs. Like that stealer gets uploaded to a panel that's modified and managed by.
Sorry, I
a-
still thought we were in
criminal-
1998 and people did things for bragging rights and it was all manual. I forgot it's 2022 and this shit happens
Automation.
automatically.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So I mean, again, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors happen here. There's a lot of conjecture. There's a lot of people that hop on the bandwagon and just say whatever. But what we do know is obviously one of the LAPSUS group members, who we can clearly kind of find a trail to, has claimed some of this.
Teabag.
Now,
I like
Wait.
Teabag better than Teapots. I don't know why.
yeah, we'll go with that. So
Did you-
again,
did you
once
thread
the
her?
initial access was done, then we have other things that we can talk about, right? Like credentials in PowerShell scripts, quick, easy access to SaaS applications. We've said for the last 5 years now that SaaS applications is a two-headed dragon. Soon as single sign-on in SaaS happens, like Now I have access to your Jira ticket. Now I have access
To your
email.
HackerOne.
Your SIM, your HackerOne. All of these pieces becomes a big issue. So these are all issues that Uber should have known. Like there's a lot of things around the assessments they didn't do, internal security. There's a lot of hiring happening, so they're spending now.
Is that real? I was wondering if that's real. Did Uber really post jobs for cybersecurity
Yes. Oh, yeah.
professionals? That is true. That is
Yep.
true. Right.
As far as I can tell, yes.
Because I saw the image, like it was a screenshot of their job postings, and I'm like, I don't believe anything that's data that's presented to me in an image.
Yep.
At all.
IT
Anything on
security
Twitter,
meme stuff.
I don't
Yeah.
believe anything on Twitter anymore.
Yeah, or any social media network, especially if it's an image, it's usually false information. But you're saying that's legit. Like Uber got hacked and was like, "Holy crap, we need to staff up our security team."
What was that? It was like a meme that I saw was along the lines of, "Hey, you know all that security funding you asked for? I got it secured.
Yep.
Here's the job postings."
Yeah.
Well, wasn't that
Again,
when we're talking about the compelling events? You're actually going to do, security right once you get whacked.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Which
Well,
is a
hello.
stupid way to do it, right? Like that costs an exponential amount, but that's that top-down coverage that we're not seeing. We've got to get the executive lead. If you're listening and you're an executive, listen to freaking ESW this week or last week. We talked through like why you need to do this preemptively and save money. Like there's all kinds of money-saving benefits. But outside of that, yes, there's some useful idiot, call it LAPSUS. Maybe they're a threat actor gang. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're being leveraged by someone else. And set up very well so that they're some good smoke and mirrors for things that other actors want to do or have access to. But, I mean, we know who LAPSUS is. We've tracked them down. There's several actors in there. I mean, Aaron Kurtage, I believe. He's in EU in London. Like, we know these skids, and their MO is pretty straightforward. And
Yeah, like two
As
are
well as
under,
the MO,
but two are
policy.
under indictment. I mean, we've got two different threads going on, right? Like I think to Jeff's point, like we've got the what happened to Uber, and then we've got like what the hell is happening with
NVIDIA?
well, Nvidia and all the other right. That's one
Microsoft.
thing. Like what happened? But
why
then we've
are
got
they out?
But what's the deal with the threat actors? What were their motivations? Were they taking advantage
Supposedly
of?
they're 18-year-old script kiddies that just want to do this shit for lols.
Yeah, but is that like what people
does that
want us
exist anymore?
to believe? Is that what some other?
Is that
Is
what
that the
they want us to
antithesis
believe?
of nation state actor APT?
100,000%, right?
I mean,
Yeah,
we
like-
can't defend
Trade-
against
trade
the
craft
one, and the other one, while they got everything, they're harmless. There might be some politics involved there.
Yeah,
Tradecraft 101. I don't know. Like again, everyone else is all at too big of a tin hat. You look at the specific actions and access to the data. You got driver codes. You got very specific pieces that they're going after from Microsoft. Now we're hitting Uber. Like there's some interesting things. Yeah, there's not a great pattern here from a standpoint of what they were after, but you look at all the GPS data that Uber has, ride shares, access
Stored
points,
credit cards.
locations,
Yeah.
stored credit cards,
They're
attribution.
all encrypted. It's
duplication.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. That database column is definitely encrypted. So again, people don't think big picture enough from a nation state standpoint. Yeah, this looks like an 18-year-old hacker for lols dumping shit in a Telegram group and then going off to a gaming platform and doing the same. But
Yeah.
you look at what data each of these have had and you start to tie that together, like there could be more. Maybe
Yeah.
there's not. Maybe there is.
Especially when certainly there's some potentially there for misdirection, like GTA 6 source code leak. But then you look at some of the potential other attributions like Okta and Microsoft and Uber. That starts to you put those three together, and that starts to become
you
terrifying.
gotta start asking the question like who benefits from these
Uh-huh.
Well, I'll tell
particular.
you,
GPS
some of
data,
the-
Okta,
Uh-huh.
very
some-
specific MFA accounts for access to very specific.
Well, and I very
Yeah.
quickly saw, let's say, social media activity talking about, be prepared. You're about to get a wave of, sales and marketing pitches from a whole lot of companies
That's kind of where I was
focused
going.
on things like MFA.
Well,
Yep.
that's where I was going with who benefits. I mean, security vendors benefit from these particular.
Right.
That's
attacks,
secondary
but-
benefits. You take
Yeah.
geopolitics out of the capitalism standpoint of this. That's secondary overflow benefits, right? Like first state benefits are always going to be nation state intelligence agencies with potential capital gains, but mostly intelligence is the capital gains are secondary to intelligence in most cases. So I would start there.
In a related story, we start talking back to that initial access, and just want to sort of throw this out there. Put on the tinfoil hat, and it will be what it is because we're already down that tinfoil hat route. We talk about the password stealing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
My story number 2 was on quote password stealing by leveraging both Edge and Chrome's advanced spell check features. In fact, it spell checks your passwords, and any form field can spell check. And specifically, if you click on the reveal password button in any of your websites, so you can see what password you're typing into, like, oh, I screwed that capital letter up. I didn't actually capitalize it. It sends that to both Google and Microsoft for advanced spell check stuff over the network, over the internet.
You give them that access, Larry. That's the permission that you enable with that.
Yeah. But like you talk about you talk about password stealing stuff, like it's right there. Like,
oh, that's the extensions, right? Like this is where that kernel level root 0, like ring 0 is a big deal. But outside of that, like even user land, you have sensitive information in the browser, sandbox browser or not. The browser itself controls all those sandboxes. So you add an extension to that. You give something like Grammarly the capability to send that back.
Extensions have way too much control over the browser. I don't know if that was in one of my stories. It might have been.
Has anybody ever turned on the predictive? I turn it off because I hate it. But you start typing a word and it starts filling out what word.
Oh, I always ducking turn that.
Has anybody ever turned that on in the password field?
Oh, it's on by default.
Actually,
it's on by default.
Yeah.
Do you remember Jeremiah Grossman's research about how autocomplete? He used ad networks. He had malware he could throw in an ad network that would go to, the ad would be shown on a legitimate website, and using the autocomplete feature, because everybody screws up and types your credit card number in the wrong field at least once in a while, he could he said basically he ran some tests. He said with about $1,000 worth of ad network space, he could probably garner about $1 million worth of credit card numbers.
1,000%. Ad networks is JavaScript. In fact, we talked about this last week. JavaScript and the ad networks that run inside of most main big corporate networks and websites, all of those are collecting telemetry data outside of just ad capture networks. That is how many of these ransomware gangs are getting their botnets deployed.
Yeah, Paul, those ad networks, we didn't talk about that just last week. I wasn't here last week, but we didn't talk about that just last week. We've been talking about that for
years.
A decade.
Yeah, over a decade.
That's how good C2, nation state C2, that is exactly how people communicate through high fidelity networks. Like, been a thing for a while.
Yep.
No one looks at it though, because it's complicated.
But Larry, your story specifically is about your story number 2.
Yeah.
Your web browser spell check, because it has to be able to read the word to spell check it.
Yep.
It's reading that word, but then it's sending it,
and then it's sending it to a quote third party,
to a cloud, or somewhere,
whether it be to Google or Microsoft. Yep.
So who do you trust? Do you trust Grammarly? Do you trust Microsoft Autocomplete? Do you trust Outlook and their auto sentence complete?
Nope.
Turn it all off. Trust no one.
I mean,
I trust pen and paper.
I mean, I don't, but by default or with limited interaction,
trust
so
the
many
sticky
people,
note under
so
your
many
mouse
people
pad.
do. So many people do.
Now, if you turn it off, does it actually stop the autocomplete, or does it just not send that autocomplete, or does it not present it?
That's a great
That is
question.
the other
And
question
it's not even. And it's not even. In this case, it's not even autocomplete. It's you type a field in and it sends it to Microsoft or Google to verify whether it's spelled properly.
So it's keystroke capturing, basically.
Because that is a direct WebSocket interacting at that browser sandbox layer, which probably is using some JavaScript in order to interact between that at the WebSocket layer. So
it's totally JavaScript.
Again,
it's totally JavaScript.
is it still sending it? Is it not when you turn it off? Is it just not presenting it?
I mean, all guarantees of security stop when you use the word WebSocket in a sentence. So,
and JavaScript. I mean, you like either one of those.
That was like my story 21 too, is along those lines. Was a Chrome loader malware. So the malware is able to redirect the user's traffic, hijack user search queries, and its malicious code is able to use PowerShell to inject itself into the browser, and added an extension into the browser. I thought it did all that through an extension. VMware actually wrote up the evolution of the Chrome loader malware. It sounds like it was the other way.
I'm immune to this one because I'm on a Mac and I don't have the power selections. loaded. So
Wait,
I'm good.
but you have Chrome, and so my one-click install that is cross-platform compatible now
But
injects
But I know not
extension
to.
your
But I
phone.
know not to click on stuff from you, Tyler. I'm kidding.
Larry,
I'm
I
kidding.
sent you that family picture for a reason. It was a good one.
I
of us.
know, but it was of your family, and I really didn't care. No, I'm kidding. Kidding.
I am curious. Your GPS jammer one was a very interesting one. I mean, it's nothing new here. Like, if I was a criminal organization, especially in Mexico, hijacking trucks or drones, I'd be using GPS jammers too. But that was an interesting topic for a couple of the companies that are doing commercial jam add-ons for things like drones and trucks that protects them from jamming. I don't remember what story that was.
Larry's story number 3.
Oh.
GPS jammers are used to hijack trucks.
Yep.
And down drones.
Yep.
Funny. One of the commercial places that I've been looking into, Infinidome, which is hilariously named, an Israeli company that offers very unique protections against jammers at the autonomous vehicles, drone, military application, name it. They do jamming protection from Israel.
Well, put this in the so what's interesting is we've covered stories in the past. Think about this in the marijuana industry, where it's still federally illegal, which it means two things. One, marijuana is going to be transported on trucks that may have GPS. Number two, the cash that is resulting from these businesses because they have a tough time storing it in a bank. I think some things have changed. I'm not sure of the details, but it's still, people still pay with cash. How they deal with it on the back end, I'm not sure. But that cash has to go from point A to point B.
Are you saying cash or cash?
Cash, as in like cash
like
money.
SH, not CHE.
He's from Boston, all right? Like, leave the
I thought
Boston
you were.
alone.
I got it confused there for a minute. Sorry, I'm old.
Speaking of cash money, apparently Hate Handles is leading a raid in our Discord channel at securityweekly.com/Discord currently. So
Twitch.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Twitch.
Yeah.
It's everything. Twitch raid. Twitch
Eric,
raid.
come on, buddy.
All these social media platforms are confusing. I'm old.
Yeah,
Right.
that's Garrett. He's amazing. If you have
Awesome.
not checked
Well,
out
that's
Hate
Thanks,
Garrett.
Garrett.
Hey, Garrett.
It's got a
Thanks,
great
Garrett.
streaming platform. Yep. Do a great job. The interesting
Join
things
the
about
Discord.
drones, though, you talk about drones and jamming. You look at Ukraine war, and we have to start thinking about the implications of being able to control the sky from an autonomous drone perspective. That tech actually becomes very important, not just from a military application, because that is one level of effort. But you look at some of the commercial avenues of some of the initiatives to send drones to Ukraine in order to provide reconnaissance for Ukrainian resistance or militants, whatever they're going to be.
I mean, technically,
If you're
that's
able
still
to
military,
control the
Tyler,
sky
let's be
or
honest.
shoot down the sky, that's a problem. So we really have to think about how this is actually getting protected, not just from a secondary add-on. but
Someone
from
can
the
shoot down the sky now?
Yeah.
Really, the sky is falling. Damn.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
If only somebody
So,
could
in all
invent something like
seriousness, you've
frequency
got,
hopping or some way to obfuscate the signal.
I know, Hetty. Thanks.
Well, so
Not in GPS,
I mean,
though, right?
Tyler,
That's
just
not
to
radio.
give a
That's
little
not radio,
pushback,
though.
reconnaissance is still military operations.
Nothing's radio.
That's number one.
Tyler. Nothing's radio.
No, it's all radio.
It's all
radio. We're talking about open source now. Do you think
No,
people-
no, we want to keep talking about drones. They're fun. Come on.
We got a lot of stories to cover.
How many drones are built on open source platforms, Paul?
Probably quite a few.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
You'd be
All right,
surprised.
that
and,
was
and,
the
it-
segue.
and in fact, there's a bunch of quote open source, ready off the shelf drones that have been leveraged by the Ukrainian military and and some of
And
the
Russia.
the only ones that I've really seen are the Ukrainians, where they're tying 30 millimeter grenades to these off the shelf drones that are not DJI.
They are really good with non-DJI drones. I don't know what it is about non-DJI drones.
Oh man, like this stuff is readily available, and they're getting nice. Yeah.
Very accurate.
Yeah. And one word, flechettes. Yep.
Yeah, they're actually. What's weird is those come from us.
But they're deploying those via drones that are off-the-shelf common open source components.
Yeah, I mean, why not?
So to your
No, they're buying American flechettes, or they were 20 years ago. Back 30 years ago, you could buy them by the pound for a couple of bucks.
But that also brings into an interesting supply chain dynamic, right? If we start to think about a war in which, okay, so maybe this particular war is just the preamble, and we talk about something where China decides to get involved. Now all DJI drones do not have the capability to fly in a certain AO for a military operation because of a firmware push. Like, that's a pretty big problem from our side and our ability to control the firmware that's getting pushed up to those.
I mean,
and the control that the supply chain
control
has
the firmware.
over our,
Control the firmware, you win.
exactly.
And considering DJI is manufactured in China, we know, politically who China is aligning themselves with.
Well, it's a good thing
so what
firmware,
happens
but it's a good thing firmware has a lot of vulnerabilities, because then it's just all up to the vulnerability researchers and exploit authors, and you can control the firmware.
That's a pretty big ask, though, when you're talking about a large fleet that's needed to, say, control the skies of Taiwan.
Yep.
So really, our next generation war is going to rely on our ability to be able to source and get from a supply chain and a shipping logistical standpoint on the ground to a particular AO for operations. This is kind of the next iteration of things that people aren't thinking about and or government maybe are thinking about and staging these things preemptively. But that relies on our ability to validate and vet a lot of the firmware and our ability to get supplies into a specific operation.
What's interesting, though, with open source, we used to have this notion that, well, since it's open, everyone can look at it and find vulnerabilities, therefore it's more secure. Now, a recent study...
Unless you were the vendor trying to sell the commercial alternative.
Correct.
In which they said, you can't trust it. It's open. It's open.
Right. Which there's some validity to that. Trust is an interesting usage of that word in that sentence. But a recent study found that 40% of professionals indicated their organization has scaled back open source software usage in the past year due to concerns around security. Which I think is interesting, that we are, or those respondents, right, and people in general, if you're making this assumption that whether it's open source or commercial, that alone, that one data point alone, dictates the level of security. I think it's not really, it's a data point maybe, but not a defining characteristic of whether or not software is secure or insecure.
Yep. I mean,
we know it's a data point, but
it's arguably
the people that are buying stuff don't know that.
Right. And I think it's an interesting data point in that, Paul, some of the words you said right up front were along the lines of, it's open source, so everybody can look at it to see whether it's secure.
Right.
And the question becomes, is anyone looking at it to see whether it's secure? I mean, I can think back within the last 6 months or so that we covered stories about vulnerabilities in open source software that had existed for before we started doing this podcast.
The pseudo vulnerability was one that was, I want to say 15, 20 years.
Well, we've talked about that a lot over the years.
Yeah.
So
because the presumption is open source, everybody's looking at, but it's also open source, labors of love. They're just trying to keep it up and running, and everybody thinks somebody else is looking at it, but nobody's looking at it.
And
from a security
like the same, you talk about labors of love. What was that around? One of the hacks we had just a couple of months ago, during the pandemic with the name is escaping me. Affected Rhode Island government crypto stuff.
Oh yeah.
With one of the big manufacturers that was using open source code that was vulnerable, that is maintained by it was maintained by two guys in a garage type of thing, and they received a couple $1,000 in funding, and
like Log4j or
Log4j. Yeah, that's it.
How could you forget that one?
If you have enough skill to actually write the code in the first place, and you're doing this as a labor of love, literally how many people are actually looking at that have the skill level to find the vulnerabilities, to then have enough confidence to commit those to those two people that are maintaining that level of code? We come back to the fact that we can't even maintain our SDLC pipeline inside of an organization that has a very good security posture, much less something that's open source on the side for free. So how do we expect this cross-pollination of
here's my fear, Tyler, in what you just said, and it's the closer that you get to the hardware when you're writing code, even less people not only understand the code, but you also, like, there's less people that understand how the hardware works. So, like, finding vulnerabilities as you kind of move closer to the hardware gets increasingly more difficult, but your privilege level, conceivably, in most cases, increases as you get to that level. Also, your options are much less. Like, where you get your hardware from and how you might remediate the problem is very different from, oh, I got a software library, I need to swap it out. Like, those are two different things.
Yeah. Not to beat a dead horse, but is that a privilege level or is that a trust level?
It's both.
Okay. It is both.
It's both baked in. It depends on the system, but it is an interaction of both, Jeff. It's a good question.
You should make sure that Mickey and Jesse, Alex and Yuri don't all go to the same place at the same time.
Yes.
We're getting down to single number of people.
Because like, I'll tell you what, a lot of the rest of them work for Apple. Which
there may be 12.
Now you got me on like where I spend my time, and I'm not pitching a product, but like I work in this area.
But you're
like,
pitching a product.
No, not pitching a product.
I was hearing a new job in there, Paul.
I'm not pitching a product at all. I'm pitching my observations in this space.
Totally. I'm just busting your stones.
Like when I read the research papers that are going back to 2014, perhaps.
Sure.
And I start looking at the names on these research papers, right? And I'm like, I get curious. I'm running a podcast. I'm like, oh, these people make good guests. Like, what are they doing today? Like, I'm curious, do they start their own company? And like, some of them went to work for Apple. And then I'm like, wait, Apple had some firmware vulnerabilities. There's two, in fact, that stick out in my mind. One is they left manufacturing mode on in their laptops. And the other, and I'm not sure if it was related or not, but when you resumed from sleep, they didn't protect the SPI write protections on the SPI flash.
Yep.
And there's a very technical
Great
reason
article.
why, if you're curious, maybe we can talk about it, but I don't want to disrupt the whole show. But in any case, but then, so I looked at the folks that have created that research, and I looked at kind of Apple, and I'm like around the time where we didn't see many firmware vulnerabilities coming out from Apple is around the time that
they hired a
folks
bunch of
like Corey and Zeno started working for Apple. I'm like, that's not a coincidence. And then I'm like, wait, Apple's got their own silicon now, which means they control the hardware and the software. But like that
they
means
really control the hardware.
They really like firmware's hardware, software. They control that, and they have hired some of the smartest people in that field. I'm like, so like Apple M1, I'm like, that's got to be really secure.
So I have a somewhat stupid question because I know what firmware was 30 years ago, but I just want to make sure, what is firmware today? When you say
now I'm going to have to write this post. So people are kind of egging me on
because I'm
now
hearing you say
to write this
firmware,
post, yes.
and I'm hearing like software that's installed on a chip. But what do you mean by firmware?
Well, there could be multiple chips that it's installed on, or multiple layers of said chip.
You can define it in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
It is software that is very close to the hardware, like very reliant in interacting with the hardware.
I mean, keep in mind, I used to work for an organization that built hardware systems. It wasn't firmware; it was
they had operating systems and software on side of that or inside of that hardware, right?
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
Well, I mean,
they had to, like, otherwise that hardware is pointless.
Well, yes, they did. But I mean, but we had a notion of
but there's different classes, Jeff. To to your point, like your microcode updates on your processor. I mean,
firmware.
It is firmware, right? But it's a very specific kind of firmware. But then there's like
we're talking about chips on the motherboard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's components within your computer, is how I like to frame it.
Fine.
Those components.
Your USB controller has firmware running on it.
Correct. Your hard drive
has firmware running on it.
Your Intel ME on Intel systems post 2006 has firmware on it.
Yep.
I mean, but they're all
your Broadcom processor.
Yes, your socks
in your Wi-Fi router has firmware on it.
Correct.
And then on top of that, there's going to be some firmware, arguably, for your bootloader.
Correct.
And then some firmware for your operating system. And many times that firmware is
that's where we
bootloader
have to define
system.
it. Right, that's where you have to define it. You're right. On embedded systems or IoT devices, your firmware.
I love that it's embedded systems.
It's always embedded system, right? But we term firmware as all of those components. Like firmware, when we worked with the WRT54G, when we said firmware, we meant It was the bootloader, the operating system, the file system, and the kernel were all packaged into one thing we called firmware.
Right.
Which
When you
was
get
on
into-
the motherboard or on a card.
That firmware was on the flash. It was on the flash chip.
Flash
It
SD
was
card.
on
flash
chips.
chips.
Yeah,
I mean, there was the chips, there was the hard drive, there's memory, which
but there's chips on the hard
It's on
drive
chips.
But
that tell it how to. Yeah.
like when you get in the PC realm,
I'm
it's-
talking 10 meg hard drives back in the old day. Okay.
Still
there's
software in there, yeah.
very big differences between an IoT device and your PC. Your PC does have those chips,
Absolutely.
but these chips do different things. There's your chip set, so your PCH, or your ICH, integrated hub controller. What is PCH? Your platform controller hub is your PCH, right? Which is kind of like the hub that you interface with your hardware with at a low level. But then you've got your SPI flash chip, which has some storage. Yeah, but you might have firmware running on another chip that has some storage on the SPI flash. So it gets like more complicated in multiple chips and multiple sets of firmware, multiple sets of storage and chips that do different things on your within your PC. Which when you unpack that, quite frankly, you're like, how does my PC even friggin' boot all the time? Like this should not work. the way
with
it
lots
does.
of firmware.
Like no wonder we have all these. Like resume from sleep is one of those things when if you look into it, like S3 resume or S3 boot script, if you Google search for that and start reading,
You
you're
know,
like,
I come from
now
a day.
I know why my PC never comes from sleep and things are working.
I come from a day when it used to take like 30 minutes to boot the workstation.
Correct.
So yeah,
That's-
it's voodoo going on
because
here.
it's initializing all the hardware.
So speaking of which, Paul, did you add your story about the SPI flash protections?
Oh, I did not. So I should have put in the show notes. I wrote a post on SPI flash protection. So there's 4 ways, very high level. Here's the TLDR.
But you're going to say 4 ways, and I'm going to counter with 5 ways, and I'll explain.
Can't wait. I'm so excited. So there's 4 ways.
5. 4
Paul
ways.
says it's 4. Larry says 5.
4.
I covered 4 in my article that are ways in which your systems collectively will basically govern which software and processes have access to write things to your SPI flash. And in your SPI flash on your computer, I lay it out for you in the blog post, is where certain things are stored, like your BIOS or UEFI is stored in your SPI flash. There's other things stored on there too, Intel ME, and other things that are stored there. But it's basically how the access to write to this SPI flash is governed. It turns out there's like not an easy answer to this. I was like, well, this shouldn't be that bad. I'm like, oh my God, because not only are there multiple ways, but there's interdependencies between those ways. So like if that bit is set and that part is protected, but this part isn't protected, you can write to it in this way. And I've actually seen diagrams that kind of map it out.
And you can write to specific regions.
Correct. And the SPI flash is broken into regions. Each one of those regions may also have a region map.
Yep.
So like your first region, starting at FLA 0, is your flash descriptor region, and your flash descriptor region contains all kinds of stuff inside that region. One is the master region, which says, hey, what other regions are on the SPI flash chip and what can write to them and what can't is kind of like your access control list. So anyway, I own all that. It turns out that that took the longest. That was the longest kind of research project. It involved, I want to say, at least 4 other of my coworkers, most of which worked for Intel at one given time, and also contributed to ChipSec, which is open source software, which does things like read these permissions from the SPI flash and report on them. And they were the authors of this. And we all had very somewhat heated debates as to how this should be described in this article, because we're like, well, we could go into detail here, but if we did, it would be another 5 to 10 pages just to explain that one thing. But we didn't want to be so high level where a lot of those technical details were lost. I'm like, guys, I want to be like middle of the road. And that was difficult, and it took a long time to put together. And I'm so proud that it's published and out there.
So there's another way. And while you're doing a favor, grab me a beer while I'm where I'm saying
I
this.
know what your 5th way is.
The 5th way. It's the WP pin on pin 5
You're a SPI programmer.
of
That's what we're asking
of
for
the SPI
alcohol.
chip.
Pass the rye, Larry.
Of the SPI chip, specifically in that if it does not have voltage applied to it, the SPI chip is write protected
Correct.
from the hardware level as opposed to this stuff
so-
where you're talking software level.
I understood it as Well, at least you can read. I don't know.
You can read, but writing is different.
So, but there are this doesn't exist on all systems, because on
Correct.
some systems you can attach a SPI controller.
Yep.
So SPI is an overloaded term. There's actually three ways it's overloaded. There's your SPI controller in your PC that sits in the PCH or ICH, right?
Yep.
There's your SPI flash, which is the storage, and then there's a SPI protocol, which is the protocol that allows them to talk.
Yep.
But you can take a physical SPI controller external.
Yep.
A lot of, I mean, there's dozens of different ones.
Yep.
Anyway, connect that directly to your SPI flash chip, and through your SPI controller, give it, depending on the spec, usually 5 volts of power will power on just that chip.
Yep. Either 3.3 or 5 volts, depending on your capabilities. Yep.
You
of the
can
chip.
flip on your power supply, not boot the computer, and that will apply power to the chip. Just don't apply more voltage than what the spec says, because that's bad.
And in a couple of cases with SPI, because of the bus, you can determine which chip you're going to talk to. There could be multiple, so you need to
there could be more than one SPI.
You need to enable your chip select, so it says, "Yeah, I'm listening." So
That's a great point.
you're applying voltage to that
chip
pin,
right? A
and
pin.
then there's also a physical hardware apply voltage or not write protect pin.
Oh, interesting. So there can be hardware. Oh,
Yes.
yeah. Chromebooks have a physical switch.
Bingo.
Yes, hardware
Yep,
switch.
yep.
Yeah.
There you get it.
Yeah.
Yes.
These are, well, this is like, if you read the post, go back and listen to this or whatever, because this is stuff I didn't cover, but I uncovered in my research for the post, but didn't make it into the final article.
Right, and that was funny because like you posted the article to some internal groups, and I read it, and I'm like, sweet. Like I didn't know about all that. Like there was some things that I didn't know about, and I knew it, but there was some other ones that like the technical details were like great, and then I'm like, but he missed one at the hardware side.
The hardware side. Yeah.
And ha ha.
Well, then it could be a future post, but it's also like I don't want to, without a lot of warnings and more research.
Yes.
Advise people that like it's a good idea to even attach a SPI controller to their, like, you buy a $2,000 laptop. I'm like, well, Paul said I can just connect this device to it, and then you fry it, right?
Yep.
Like, there's some responsibility.
Larry said it's okay.
Yeah, Larry said it's okay.
It's,
like, you can
it's
just do
totally
that.
okay,
Yeah.
and you
Hey,
take the
And
responsibility.
if Larry
on yourself.
jumped off a bridge,
Stupid
Would you?
question. Does
I
hardware
100% would jump off and grab him.
does
Probably
hardware do anything without firmware or software in 2022?
No.
It
It
depends.
does not.
And yes, Paul wears them.
Well, that would be Jeff's
wait. Actually, sorry, Jeff, say that again.
In 2022, does hardware do anything without firmware or software?
Yes.
When you qualify that with firmware or software, like there needs to be some. I mean, it does.
No, there doesn't.
It does stuff. It's not going to do a whole lot of stuff without some software or microcode or firmware.
And
running on it, right?
I'm going to tell you, no, hardware
No.
in 2022 will function, in fact, without some sort of firmware or software, because you don't know how many times I have seen a project that says, "Oh, I did this thing with an Arduino that runs some microcode, some firmware that could have very easily been done with an analog 555 timer."
Yes.
And that requires zero software.
Correct.
It requires a
is
resistor
that
and a
timer
capacitor.
not running software? Is that not running software?
No, it is
You
not.
look-
It is in silicon, and it requires a resistor and a capacitor to determine the timing interval.
Yes. With the
Okay.
electrical engineering wise, yes.
So
These
you
components.
look at the Enigma, you look at the printing press, and even back to the printing press, like the manual mechanical operation of most hardware, I would say up till 1980 is very, very rare. Like, name a couple examples. Like you're talking about one single example where a capacitor is actually running something, but that even
A
even back-
potentiometer, a rheostat, a transistor radio.
I think, but I mean, physics wise, yes.
1980?
Yeah.
So, Jeff, when you power on a computer, yes, physics wise, stuff is happening to get very, very quickly to the point where the reset vector and where the first code that's running to boot your computer is running for platform initialization.
But,
That's
By the way, how
but
about
in the
ASICs,
cloud,
sir?
this is all software based, right?
no, someone had to turn on a computer at some point.
Yep.
Wait, what?
That had a
To
disk.
initialize software
What?
in the reset vector.
Yep, that had a network
Yes,
control.
what?
That had a network adapter that is running firmware on the chipset on the network
Right.
adapter.
Yes.
Actually, Tyler, cryptocurrency miners run ASICs, yes?
They do. They do rely on firmware within inside of the GPU and or the ASICs miners in order to compute that algorithm on the chipset.
And GPUs have multiple pieces of firmware.
I wasn't saying
That run on
JPUs.
them,
I was saying ASICs specifically. Okay.
ASICs specifically,
The
yes, they do
ASICs
have firmware.
do the math
In silicon.
on the data, but it's coded into the chip.
Yep, it's
not a
it's
firmware.
It's an instruction
silicon.
set, though, right? Like that's firmware. Instruction set with inside the firmware is an instruction set on the hardware.
Yes, it's in silicon as opposed to something like an FPGA or a
It's
field
not
programmable
code.
gate array.
It's hard code.
Yep.
I mean, it's really
Is it
hard
micro-
coded.
is it mi- would you call that microcode?
It's microcode. Like you can update it. There's firmware updates for the ASICs miners.
Just like
back
your
there.
Intel processor has microcode. I mean, it's a
Flash
processor, like an
Yep.
FPGA or an ASIC or an Intel processor, or processors
Yep.
that run microcode.
But now that said, those ASICs are limited in the microcode that they can do. Is in that my understanding is that the ASICs are designed to do a specific type of math,
Right.
one or
Correct.
two specific
Correct.
type of
Yeah.
math, really
Correct.
well, and that is baked into the transistor arrays in hardware.
But you can flash those to do
Sure.
additional or more optimized math. But it is
Absolutely,
very specific.
but they're effectively
But that code
optimizing
is
the way
code.
they're optimizing the ways in which they use those set of transistors,
I mean,
as opposed to
I can see that. I can see that.
as opposed to
Code's code,
adding
though,
more transistors, which would be a physical impossibility because you can't.
But that's
create
integrated into the firmware of the actual silicon, which is still software based.
That's not firmware.
Updated.
That's firmware. That's firmware.
No, it's not.
I mean,
Is
If
it
it's,
not
if it's burned
software,
into
but
silicon, it's not firmware.
of course it is.
well, it can be
It's not.
updated. It can be changed. You can
Now
be
we're
hacked.
getting to the point of my question.
I love this, Jeff. That
Yes.
You sparked this, right? Is part of the definition of firmware that I can update it.
Mhm.
But,
Well, no,
you can
so here's
update.
the
You can
difference.
update
Actually,
both firmware
what I
and
think what we're
software.
really saying is it code or
It's
is it in the
hardwired,
hardware?
but
is
you can get
hardware actually
updates
still
over
code?
the web and install them yourself.
Well, I mean, you take this back to the old, the Intel 486 processor or the Pentium processor that had a math bug because
Pentium 90.
the
The
hardware.
floating coprocessor, the floating math
floating
coprocessor,
coprocessor had
floating
an
point math
issue.
coprocessor, yeah.
Had an issue with the hardware, the ASIC, that they corrected in
Yeah.
software.
Which is
That's software.
at least a 20-year-old bug, right?
It's 2 decades old.
Yeah, it's at least.
Yes.
It's probably closer to 25.
Enigma again.
Quarter century.
Enigma. I go back to like if it doesn't have a handle, a mechanism to pull something that I can modify with something physical, like then it's software.
Yeah, but
There's timing. There's timing on an Enigma. There's timing on a printing press.
I
Both
don't
of
know,
those
but
are mechanical.
software
Outside mechanical is software.
But software manipulates bits that tells a contact trace to apply power or not
Now,
through a register,
Software.
right?
It's a really
now-
it's a really fancy player piano.
Yeah.
It's still firmware. That's Modbus. Modbus will change a register that does some physical shit.
Right.
That's
right.
still
It's
software.
a really
manipulated.
fancy player piano.
Which
That's a bit-
so
that's
that,
a
well,
great
it's interesting
analogy.
how that
the player
relates to my
piano or the
article.
Jacquard loom.
That relates to my
Right?
article because I talk about how you are basically setting bits and registers that are making some of those changes to lock or
sort
or
of
not
in
lock
the
things,
old
yeah.
days, you had to crack open the case and actually flip switches.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. That would be, yeah.
Jeff, the IMSI
Yep,
8080.
switch.
Jeff, I recently, speaking of that, I recently saw a video about someone creating a program on the IMSI 8080 to perform math that would literally take the lights and make it do the kit back and forth by repeating the same mathematical operation by adding and so forth.
Right.
And
Who
then-
has this much time? I want to know who has this time.
and to make matters worse, they did similar types of things with a specific adding machine, and it was from a movie in which you did a specific operation of adding math, and literally the physical display, it was a mechanical adding machine, and it would go and sometimes it would get stuck and would fail to do the math properly.
Dear Lord
What
God
movie
Almighty.
was that? I think I've seen it.
So there
I'll figure it
there are analog calculators that do math by gears and switches and things like that, right?
Yep.
There's no electronics in it. There's no.
It's mechanical.
There's no. It's all mechanical.
Mechanical.
Okay. If I change a gear, am I updating the firmware?
No, there's
No, you're updating the hardware.
a mechanical, physical aspect that you change.
Firmware
If you
is
have to physically
listen,
change something,
firmware.
What is software?
Firmware.
What is firmware? And
we
what
we
is
are
hardware?
we are hardware. All right. If we're gonna get down to the mechanics of this, like
No,
my
here's a better
spirit is firmware,
definition for firmware.
this body
Firmware
is hard-
is just software that's inconvenient to program.
Yes, and hard to patch.
Oh, you
but
are not
in
wrong.
theory, it's updatable.
Correct.
Whereas
Well, in theory, all software is updatable.
Right,
If you
but
think of like
hardware-
hardware definition,
hardware, in theory, it's the way it's been built.
But I can change
there is
hardware.
no updating.
So that
that's
shirt
not
is always
true.
going to fit the same way, because that's hardware, right? Your
But,
body's
like,
hardware.
my
your spirit's software.
the point I was making you this morning is that firmware is unique such that yes, it is software and I can update it, but it's so close to the hardware, it's dependent on the hardware. In other words, if I update firmware on my system that tells it to implement this register, but that's not in the hardware that I have, my software update is doesn't mean a damn thing.
And what's the difference between dependency and trust? Since I'm harping on trust today.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Jeff, I trust you.
And
A dependency is almost like forced trust. I mean, they're almost exclusive. If I say I have a dependency, that's something I have to trust.
Well, trust implies you have a choice to not trust.
I guess I could trust a dependency.
Dependency
or not.
is I got no other choice.
Yeah.
But proceed, right?
Or if I don't, I mean, it's not going to work.
So here it is. It is the Friedan STW10 calculator playing the Friedan March.
I'm
Oh,
sorry, you need a
sorry.
link in Discord.
And,
like
yeah,
now.
all
Drop
right,
it,
here
drop
we go. Here it goes right into Discord because
And Adrian, please drop your Flopatron 3.0 in Discord as well, because I think people get a major kick out
the
of that.
Flopatron is 3.0 is amazing.
I don't want to see Adrian's Flopatron. Just saying.
Why is it on version 3 is what I want to know.
Anyway.
That's really cool. I'll have to play that later. You know, it's fascinating when we think about the difference between hardware, software, firmware, and where those boundaries intersect and the fuzziness of those boundaries. And we start talking about all of those pieces, and then to go to what Jeff is saying is where is your boundaries of trust? You know, if your firmware is as Paul, as you so clearly stated, firmware is software that's hard to update. But I mean, how many times have we seen evil grade on software and evil firmware, which is why we do MD5 sums and like it's.
Well,
this
I
is
think
awkward.
So
that
is
the
the trust
challenge
actually hardware or software? Like, is the
But I think some
hardware
of
ever the problem?
Yes. I think so. Here's
Because firmware
here's
lives
one-
on the hardware.
Here's
Firmware's
one,
a problem.
here's one scenario where I'm putting this in the context of a supply chain. And this came out in conversations that we had about my post. And I said, we've got all these protection mechanisms for protecting the SPI flash that are represented in this case as like bits I can flip, registers that I can flip that bit to say, I want to turn on this protection. And I was asking the team, I'm like, so why can't I just go set those? Like as a user, I know that this bit should be set. I know that I got to go change this register value, and that register value forces this bit to flip, and then it should offer me more protection. The way it works in UEFI in BIOS is I have to call an SMI handler, and I explain that in my blog post, right? So the scenario is like, well, Paul, you could you could manually write code that goes and flips that bit, right? But if there's no SMI handler running inside of your BIOS that would check that bit, then you setting that bit means nothing. So in other words, like I could try and fix the problem on my own, but because my upstream provider in my supply chain hasn't provided all the other necessary bits, my change isn't going to mean anything. There's no SMI, there's no code. SMI runs a protected RAM and would actually check that bit. If that code isn't there, I don't get that protection. I struggle with like, how does that go into regular software?
Right.
regular software that's operating in application space, right? Not in ring -2 or whatever, or -1. I can change that stuff. And if
Is
there's
there a
not
ring
code,
1 and 2? Is there a plus?
There are. Yeah,
is
yeah,
there
yeah.
a plus
There-
side to all this?
But,
did I
but
just
is,
ring
that, is that
stuff?
hardware? Is that hardware code and the design spec for the hardware only accessible and only usable because there's software that overlays that hardware?
That's
That
correct.
hardware has to be leveraged by a instruction set that lives with inside of software or firmware on the piece of
Yeah,
hardware.
developers
that-
have to use what's in hardware. It's actually a conversation I had today with an
Ones
upcoming
and zero
guest.
software.
Like
Ones
hardware
and zero-
designers are like, hey, we're going to put all this cool stuff in. And software designers are like, I got a deadline. I'm not using any of that stuff. What are you talking about, right? So we could be way more secure, but we're not because the pressure is on software developers to implement the code that takes advantage of those hardware features. Yes, Tyler. Great point.
So, I think we should probably move along. But
Yeah,
Jeff asked
I'm
about
why? This is awesome.
10 minutes. I've been trying for the best 10 minutes to move on.
Jeff,
I want to talk about zero-day exploit detection using AI and machine learning with IPS.
real quick. Jeff asked the movie, and the movie is The Apartment from 1960.
I remember that movie.
Which the film follows an insurance clerk, Lemon, who, in hope of climbing the corporate
Jack
ladder,
Lemmon, that is.
Jack Lemmon, yeah.
that lets the more senior coworkers use his Upper West Side apartment to conduct extramarital affairs.
Mm-hmm.
And he's attracted to an elevator operator, McLean, in his office building, unaware that she's having an affair with his immediate boss, McMurray. So he's an insurance clerk that uses one of these tabulation machines and conducts the march.
What if I...
Before you move on, I mean, I want to give some context to why I've been throwing out these deep questions, okay? And it's been 9 months. I have a lot to catch up on. In the world that I came from almost 40 years ago.
Oh God, here's the old questions again.
Well, I mean, I went
miss
to
you,
work
Jeff.
for an organization that built hardware devices that provided secure communications.
NASA.
And they were you're close,
Something like that,
Tyler.
yeah, something like that. Yeah,
You're
sure.
in the ballpark.
One letter off.
Yeah,
10 miles north.
yeah, and one less asshole.
But I think you had interviewed him years ago. The chief scientist in the organization that I worked for at the time, Brian Snow. I
Brian
think you
Snow, he
interviewed him at
passed
some
away,
point.
unfortunately. Yes,
Yeah, he did.
It's sad.
Not related in any sense to the other NASA guy.
Just shut up, Tyler. Let me talk. It's my moment. Okay. Keep it on me. All right. I got 9 months of stuff to catch up.
Jeff, I missed you.
Jeff's ready to have a baby.
Jeff, I missed you. No,
In the world
Gus,
where I
you're not
started.
on Jeff. Come on.
Keep it on me, God. In the world that I came from, it was all hardware. It was hardware devices they weren't connected to networks. It was mostly broadcasting what we would call radio signals.
Enigma.
And I remember Brian Snow, I heard him, he was chief scientist for the organization that I worked for, and he said, well, there's really no such thing as software. It's all hardware, because that was the paradigm that they lived in at the time.
For sure.
Slow forward 40 years, I kind of think that the paradigm is flipped. There's no such thing as hardware. It's all software.
You're so right.
And I'm fascinated by that because, the presumption is hardware was more secure, more easy to secure, more easy to keep secure.
Wasn't it though?
Well, I think the answer is yes, Tyler. But
it wasn't scalable though.
Wait, Gus, what are you doing? It's not on Jeff.
It's Gus.
Seriously,
We can have voices coming in. Keep the damn camera on me.
And Jeff, I was literally going to say, and keep it on Jeff.
Keep it on Jeff.
Because I've got a joke here. But literally, this is what I deal with software-defined radio. In that, for so many years, radio was defined in hardware, and now we can move that to software.
Right.
But Gus, look at me. No, seriously, look at me.
Gus
Right.
is so confused.
Okay,
He's like, what
Gus,
the hell?
you have my permission. Put the camera on.
Gus, look at me.
Larry for a minute.
Look at me.
Gus? There we go.
I'm the mermaid now. Kidding.
That's it.
That's it.
Oh
All right,
my
back
God.
to me,
Back to
guys.
Jeff.
Are you guys? But are you guys?
I'm fascinated by the.
you done-
Paul
are you done
wants
yet?
control back of this.
Are you done yet?
No, I'm not done yet. I'm fascinated by the way we've evolved to. It's all about the software now,
Get under the
and
cigar,
yet the
Paul. It's gonna be a long night.
software has introduced so many issues that seemingly. I mean, the reason we're in business, the reason we have this podcast and we talk about this stuff week in and week out is not stuff that were issues when it was all hardware. Of course, I also come from a world where the most secure form of communication is a one-time pad, which is not breakable, but it's not scalable. It doesn't provide quick communication. So we've had to compromise for accessibility, for ease of use, for convenience. And we have all these challenges that we knew that were there, but but there's so much stuff we can do. I find it fascinating, and and to round out, I have to throw in a PCI moment. The reason I keep asking about this whole hardware, firmware, software thing is, in the world of PCI, very much the technology has evolved so that there's encryption from the time that you tap or dip or swipe a card. And the original standard that came out was, okay, you can do that and basically eliminate your need as a merchant or a retailer to do all the things the PCI requires because you have no ability to decrypt the data. But the way that the standard was originally written was, well, it's got to be in the device where you're the card reader, and it's got to be an embedded firmware that can't be accessible, can't be electronically breached. If somebody physically tries to get to it, it's going to blow up and zero eyes and stuff like that. That was the original intent, but they've sort of evolved. I'm learning because I'm back in the PCI world, that it's really, as long as it's running on that device, and it can be software, and it can be firmware, it can be whatever, but it's in no way an embedded, it's in a chip, and it's just hard to get to. And that's a frustration that I'm dealing with in the real world, where I'm kind of like having to, okay, it's not DoD definition of firmware and dedicated and
the problem
not
with
compromised.
sheer
It's almost segment 1. It's almost TPM like we talked about earlier.
The problem with the more you rely on the hardware is the more difficult time you have updating that. That means, if it has a bug.
But in the old days, hardware didn't need to be updated because nobody could get to it to find bugs and vulnerabilities. It just worked. And you couldn't get to it.
The security through obscurity.
We did crack the Enigma machine, and conceivably they would have to create.
No, we didn't crack the Enigma machine. It was in the implementation.
In the implementation.
There were some cryptographic
But to
weaknesses.
fix that, wouldn't they have to manufacture new hardware?
Yes, they did, and they went from a 3-rotor to a 4-rotor machine.
Correct.
Which made it
that's not true.
computationally harder.
Yep.
No, it is true.
That's not true. They ran 3-rotor and 4-rotor machine at the same time.
Okay,
This
but
is true.
4-rotor
Let's
machines were Navy and 3-rotors were Army, or am I having
But
backwards?
still,
But
It was
my
not
point
that
is,
there was
That's
an
because they
update.
cost a lot of money and they needed to keep using it, and lower level communications could still be 3-rotor.
the reason
and
we
4-level
push
rotors.
more into the software realm is that it's updatable, and that's a double-edged sword.
It is absolutely a double-edged
We
sword.
do have the
And I think
capability.
we seem to be losing more than winning sometimes.
I agree. I agree, depending on the battle, right? But it means that with software, we can update it to be more secure. But also it means that update mechanism leaves us vulnerable to malicious actors who can take advantage of that and gain control of that software at a very low level. If we're sticking with this firmware thing. This is the whole, when I was first introduced to Eclipsium, this was my whole realization. Like, whoa, what do you mean? Like, I need to boot on a floppy to update this stuff and have physical access.
A what?
Well, no. A floppy disk.
A what?
Right? 3.5-inch floppy disk.
Oh, a
But no.
save icon. Okay.
Yeah, you got to boot on a save icon.
We need to be able to update this stuff through software, but it's not even that binary 0 and 1. You update certain things through software that have different levels of protection, and certain things can be updated one way and certain things can be updated another way, which is what I'm starting to unpack that I revealed in my post, right?
Yep.
But there are also benefits to that. It means I can revoke a hash or certificate for secure boot, which is great. It also means that if I don't protect it correctly, attackers can inject code and or wipe out certain parts of the spy flash in this case, which could have adverse effects like creating a brick.
Yeah.
Of your system.
And Paul, I'm going to get a little deep here. Like, we need to potentially start treating our software like hardware.
Like doo-doo?
Like, dude,
Doo-doo?
yeah. We need to start treating our software like hardware. In that, if we went from, say, a 3-rotor to a 4-rotor Enigma machine, or we replaced rotors because the internal wiring of those rotors on the Enigma machine were different. Like, there was some secrecy there to distribute said hardware and the components and the internals part of the software. We need on the hardware. We need to start treating our software in the same fashion.
Immutable until updated by an authorized person. I mean,
Yeah, or encrypted
Or
versions
just immutable,
of,
but the problem-
encrypted and authorized versions
The
of
problem is
software.
someone has to make that immutable at some point to lock those settings in place. And in my experience, that doesn't always happen.
It doesn't,
Right? Because it gets shipped with manufacturing mode, not locked down, which means now whoever gains control of that system can do that.
And then also we start you start treating the software like hardware. You encrypt it. You have a certificate that you can revoke, and all of those types of things to whether or not the software update is valid. Trust but verify. But the problem is we end up with the chicken and egg problem. Is that you put the hardware that has the software for treating your software like hardware into the field in the hands of millions.
Right.
And with hands-on, it's game over. So at some point, some nation state or some...
That's how we end up with SMM backdoors, right?
Yeah.
SMM is the like highest privileged mode of your processor in hardware, but there's a software component that allows people to take advantage of that we've seen over time.
Right. And you protect that, and great. Well, that protection is done in hardware in some combination with software.
Correct.
That you put in the hands of millions of people that could potentially attack that.
Correct.
So chicken and egg problem.
What we really need, though, is next generation IPS with AI ML to detect zero-day exploits. Now you guys are.
I'm out of alcohol,
hold on,
man. What's wrong
you
with
guys are all laughing. Now let's just unpack what I said.
Is the AI/ML hardware, firmware, or software based?
No, we're not
Yes.
going there.
And Paul, you
Is
put
that data set actually verified and backed and tested? It's not tainted.
So
There's no
Paul,
way to
you
hack
put the
against-
story in, and I looked at it, and I went to the title, and I'm like, AIML, and then I
I
went,
did the same thing.
and I went, I didn't even read past the title. And went, oh shit,
Yeah.
this is a great application of AI and ML in our space for IDS.
This truly is a next generation intrusion prevention system that uses AI and ML and uses models and read the article effectively to detect zero-day exploits. And when I say that, I'm like, this is stuff we make fun of all the time. But then I read the article and it says, look, our model has learned more generalizable common patterns in command injection exploits while also being specific enough to avoid false positive. In latest tests, we achieved a true positive rate of greater than 99% and a false positive rate of less than 0.025%. All kidding aside, they have presented evidence that they really did create a next generation IPS with AI ML to detect zero-day exploits.
Yep.
They provide examples. They're like, look, we took this exploit. They even looked at zero-day and modeled zero-day exploits for command injection. And they're like, our model was able to detect that.
Yep.
I'm like, that's pretty cool. And this was from, hold on, let's give credit where credit is due.
Yes.
From Unit 42 at Palo Alto Networks.
And arguably, given enough data,
correct.
an AI ML model can do that. And
don't forget, command injection is a more finite data set than a lot of other attacks, right? Because you can kind of model like what a command is, and a command's not supposed to be in this particular place. And I can feed the model, here's what commands look like, right?
And how they can be obfuscated, and what potentially new ways in which they could be obfuscated. And
so if
training that model is key for that type of stuff. But the fact that they can train a model to do that detection for command injection and whatever type of commands look like, and they can understand that is like we make fun of that. That's a great
they're not
application.
claiming like even 99% protection of all command injection exploits, right?
Yeah,
but
that's
like
not
what they're
100%.
saying, no, like what they're saying is for certain command injection attacks, like we can detect that at a pretty high rate with a low false positive rate, and they present data. And I tell you what,
I tried something else.
And continued application of data to that AI ML model with trying something else will only improve the AI ML model.
Correct. And they also
Jeff?
do it for SQL injection as well.
Josh.
You're
Jeff,
not
in the
wrong.
old days, what did they call a system that you tested so sufficiently that you knew every possible response to it? There's a specific term for it.
You're
Oh,
asking who?
There
Me?
is.
Jeff.
Jeff,
Oh gosh.
there are versions of Linux that they literally have tested every freaking command, and they know every possible response that operating system will give. So they, it's not Turing complete. I can't think of the word, but there's a word for that. And what this does, if I read this right, what this does is it's trying to make the machine, the system that it's working on, do anything it can do, and then decide whether that thing is benign or malicious, right?
So this snippet, this snippet, Josh, was I think in relation to what you're saying. So he says that we trained a state-of-the-art convolutional neural network with cutting-edge deep learning technologies loosely based on previous academic research, while variable length input suggests that a recurrent model structure such as recurrent neural network or long-term short memory network may be suitable. Research shows that a simple convolutional architecture often outperforms recurrent models. Like that was written by someone that knows their shit when it comes to ML models.
And Tyler, I know you got a comment. I want to throw something out here, but Tyler, go ahead.
No, I mean that I think that's 100% accurate from an ML data perspective, and the models in which they're throwing at that, whether that short memory and they're leveraging that, and they've evaluated the data set in which it is able to evaluate those terms. That allows a very high fidelity alert and behavioral analysis set of data. Like,
Tyler, you're coming in kind of quiet.
Come
again.
closer to your microphone.
Come closer to your mic.
Get your mic like
as
up to
people
just
shit
Goose,
on
give him a
ML
boost,
and
Goose.
AI.
no, just like your face at the rest
It's not
area.
boost.
At the
A microphone, like it's directional.
Yeah, give him
Your Yeti.
Tyler needs a boost.
I got a boost. How was that?
That's better.
That's
That's better.
No, I mean ML and AI. Like, as much as people shit on this, like the data sets and the graph, the theory behind this, and the way in which the short math and short memory analysis takes place, behavioral analysis in the ML models and what ML data sets are fed to that actually allow for a very high fidelity alerting for very situational aware actions. And
So
people don't
Tyler,
realize,
in my limited understanding of machine learning, I think of it in the Google Photos model. I can search all my Google Photos for Apple, and it shows me all the pictures of Apple. That's because they fed the model a ton of pictures of apples to train the model to recognize an apple. And while they're
but not just an apple in text, an apple in context,
right.
an apple
You're right. Pictures are much easier, which is why I often use that.
an
as
apple
an
in
example.
emoji features from all the sexting you've done. Yes.
Yes. But they've done that with command injection attacks. Essentially, at a very high level, that's what this article is talking about, is that, look, we trained an ML model to spot command injection attacks and SQL injection attacks, but applied it what I believe to be very well in their testing, and provided evidence to say, like, then we took an actual command injection attack and we ran it through and we caught it. And by the way, we took a bunch of other command and we tested our model. Which is, I think, some of the missing pieces where people use AI and ML. Like, oh yeah, we have AI and ML, but like, how well did you test and train your model, and two, test your model to make sure that it can do that?
So not just that. So you have a couple aspects here, and this is where the disparate, the aspects of ML and AI buzzwords take a real serious effect in security. You have the security people that know what security does, how they evaluate scenarios, behavior, IOCs, all of those pieces. You have the ML people and AI people, right, that have the data science backing side of this.
And Tyler,
and
my comments will back right into this. So,
Oh no,
Yes.
we lost Tyler.
I'm here.
Back. He's back.
So
keep going.
the data backing people that actually have the science that backs the data side of this, but have no security aspects to understand how the data sets apply to each of the individual pieces that are being evaluated, and then what the ML and AI data sets are actually doing from a math theory side. That's the disparate side that we're trying to merge and bring together. We have all these buzzwords inside of security that are trying to integrate AI and ML, which are fantastic. They do provide a bunch of value inside security, but we have no understanding on each side of the house. Security has no understanding of what AI and ML means from a math side. Math people have no idea what they're looking at from an evaluation side of what the security implications are and what they're evaluating with the data sets that they're bringing. And so we're trying to merge those together right now and really bring together an AI and ML fundamental data set that is evaluating each of these pieces from a heuristic standpoint that is doing good security.
Yep.
That is not done because each of those sides do not communicate very well, and that is not being brought together.
I think as engineers, we look for this completeness that it has to be 100%. So if you look at my story number 10,
But no, before you move on, I got one. So we're talking about training AI ML models to do defense and detection of security vulnerabilities, exploitation, network traffic, you name it. Think back about 5 years ago to DEF CON CTF.
Huh?
DARPA.
Are you talking about the
DARPA Grand Challenge?
The DARPA.
Yes. In which the contestants, the teams, were not allowed to physically participate in that they had to design AI ML models to discover zero-day.
Mm-hmm.
This becomes one of those, Skynet goes alive type of things, and train your detection methods using AI ML to discover vulnerability issues. And when detected, on the positive, the detection AI ML inform your attack AI ML that we found you, find another path.
Mm-hmm.
And do that in an iterative process to train both models using AI ML
in ways that humans may or may not think about.
Yes!
That's the other side of of this, that we really consider AI and ML inferior, but at the core of what it's looking at, it is evaluating a subsidiary set of instructions and heuristics and behavior that as a human we may or may not exemplify. And that means that A, we're probably going to get detected in ways we would not think of. B, we may be able to bypass and mitigate those particular preemptive areas that we may not have thought of getting detected in. So that provides
and can do so faster because
value.
And can do so faster because
But it's still a tool, because I still think we haven't gotten to the point where
defense in depth, it is not prime ready. It is not a single entity in which you can just rely on.
If you look at my story number 10 and you go spot the command injection flaw, as humans, we're going to look at that string and go, oh, there it is.
I see it is. So
how do you recreate that in AI and ML? Like 100% we're not there yet.
Speaking of which, Paul, pseudo beer me.
Yeah. we are really good at
pseudo bourbon me.
Oh.
As humans, we are so good at identifying patterns.
Smaller bottle.
Yes.
Not emulate that in code and or software in any way, shape, or form. There's no way to emulate that yet. However, we can do that very quickly at scale across large data sets. So
that's what computers are good at. Is at scale with large data sets. That's where computers come in handy. If you look at the individual cases or specifics, humans are still better and going, oh, I can spot that.
Yeah.
So I have a stupid question.
Pattern recognition from the humans is way better than anything we can do computer-based. I mean, you take this back to the 1940s, and we go look at some of the things that code girls did that during the 1940s.
I can spot that fire hydrant better than a robot can.
Why do you think Google has captchas that identify fire hydrants?
Right.
Because we're better at it than they are. But
how is that possible?
How is that possible?
But could we use AI ML models to train AI ML models to be better at that?
Yes, but then they would be detected based on how fast they reacted, because they're so good that then they would be objectively.
But who cares? Who cares if they're detected? If
solve that with a pseudo random sleep statement.
Goose, it's time to put the camera on me. I would posit.
Oh my God! Jeff, I missed you.
I mean, Tyler, you were talking earlier about AI and ML as if they were two different things, and then later you lumped them together. So I'm confused.
No, they are two different.
But
they are different things.
Okay, if they are, but it's all pattern recognition, which is not a new concept. I mean, this is a very old concept.
Decision tree, yeah.
Actually, I said the same thing Jeff, for a very long time that all AI/ML is pattern recognition. I will say that machine learning is still just pattern recognition. AI
Decision
is getting
tree.
to the point.
AI is not.
Come on,
Sorry?
haven't you seen the memes where it's
To put this in context,
it's a bunch of if
Skynet
statements.
became self-aware, over 25 years ago.
In 1980.
It was August 29th, 1997.
Yep.
Oh,
For
my
those
bad.
who are keeping track at home. So
We're a long way from self-awareness.
we are a long way from self-aware. But
let's
at
not
the
look
end
at
of the
the
day,
dice.
it's
But-
pattern recognition.
I will argue we don't know whether we're a long way from self-awareness because maybe
Yeah.
the self-awareness is keeping itself.
Oh, there was
hidden.
that. Wasn't a Google engineer found
It
something?
was a Google engineer.
It was
Yep.
a Google
Yes.
engineer that found.
Well,
something
we all live in a
self-aware.
simulation anyway, so what's the big problem?
Yeah.
but we thought he was,
I mean, randomly in the morning, I'll just walk out of my back deck and go computer end simulation just to check. I mean, because you never know. You never know,
No,
Would you like the
you're
red pill or
brave.
the
You're
blue
brave.
pill, Paul?
right?
I don't say
Take
that.
both
It
at
is-
the same time.
Have you seen Star Trek Lower Decks?
I have
Oh,
not.
God.
You
it's
have
funny.
to watch Star.
No.
Oh, so Josh has seen it, right? Freaking hilarious.
Is that on Pornhub?
Like no, it's on Paramount. It's on
Paramount,
Paramount.
okay.
You said Mount.
But Josh,
said
right?
para.
It's hilarious.
All I've seen are the YouTube clips, but I saw one
No, you
going
gotta
down,
watch the
falling
show.
down a hole
Well,
in
don't
a
get
YouTube
me
hole.
started on how we're living the technology world that Star Trek invented.
No.
The original series in the 60s.
We're not
Come
even
on,
close.
Samsung just came out with the flip phone again.
Come on. Lucas just implied that droids were sentient beings in Star Wars, and Star Trek dug into it a lot more with data. It really did, like, actually explore
Yeah, but that's the
challenges.
next generation. But
Yeah.
Star Trek, the original series, had the M5.
I don't remember that one.
The M5 was
Apple's
the
not there yet. They're talking about the M1
supercomputer
and M2.
that the
Yeah,
I forget
there
the name
was-
of the character, but he built the computer.
Right. And 42 is the answer to
and
life,
he-
universe,
he-
and everything.
He
That was
built.
different.
He,
No.
he modeled it after his own brain, and he happened to be
Yeah, yeah.
crazy.
Right.
And so the
Brewster,
computer was
Brewster.
crazy. M5.
I mean,
think
there's
it was-
there's a whole podcast that we could do probably from now until the end of our time on this earth about science fiction and how they've tackled the issues of sentient beings, AI, and ML.
Yeah,
For sure.
I wrote an article on that several years ago when you
And-
sent me to
and how
IBM.
and how sci-fi has affected what we've developed as a society.
It's shown us the possibilities,
Yep,
but
it's shown us the possibilities by being crazy, and then
Right.
like 30 years later, it exists.
and yet we're
Yeah.
kind of excited about the article we covered. But that's like so many light years like away from what we're talking about. We see it in science fiction, right?
So my question, though, for
Ex Machina, you have to go watch Ex
Machina.
Do you say
And
Her.
Yep, her and
Machina.
Is it Machina or Machina?
Ex Machina.
Machina.
And you have to watch them in a specific order.
All right, what's
Really?
the order?
Ex Machina, then her.
Then her. Okay.
Yes.
Are there other ones in there that you should watch?
No, you watch those two back to
No.
back. And this is on advice from Josh Wright.
Mm-hmm.
And watching them in that order.
I'm kind of scared. When I
Will
watch those in that order, I'm kind of freaked out.
terrify
I'm
you.
terrified. Yeah, it's very
So,
scary.
Ex Machina will do the holy shit. This is what happens when they go bad.
Yep.
And her is maybe the not so bad, but it could have gone horribly fucking bad.
Right.
I will find the link to the article that I wrote about that IBM conference you sent me to.
Yes.
Probably,
That was
5 years
yeah,
ago.
Yeah.
Because I wrote the article "Man versus Machine," and
Mhm.
they like, oh, that's very confrontational because it was all about what's the IBM computer, Watson.
Watson.
So I wrote this article where I was looking at the science fiction aspect, and there's the sort of benign, the machines become smart, but they want to help humanity, which is more like Spock and Data, next Star Trek Next Generation. But then there's the Ex Machina, Terminator. The machines come smart and like, oh, the main problem with the civilization,
The Matrix. Yeah.
Yep.
is humans. We need to eliminate the
Right.
the bug.
I'm
Well,
hearing
it's
from
Ultron from the Marvel comics.
I'm
yeah.
hearing from a longtime listener that the actual progression should be Transcendence, Ex Machina, and then her.
Good-
And I've
good
never
point.
seen Transcendence.
I might. If I do, I don't remember it.
But
it
you-
probably means I haven't seen it.
yeah. Thanks, Brendan.
But so my question was, to the degree AI ML, how would that have helped Uber?
It wouldn't.
Well,
have.
It wouldn't have.
Ooh.
So why are we talking about it?
Oh no.
Okay, so
No,
I take that back.
no,
I take,
Jeff,
I take
I
that
missed
back.
you.
no,
I've missed being here.
no. It could have helped Uber.
It could have.
It could
Heuristic
have.
behavior
You
for
mean-
login identification, location, and the ability for device identification would have come into play if they had any of those things turned on in O365 like they should have.
I'd also argue that there were some post-compromise indicators that we talk about someone accessing a file that had credentials embedded in it.
Sysvol is always
And-
open to all domain users, though.
But that file had credentials that were embedded in it, and that from a detection perspective, I mean, aside from AI ML, and if you have a long enough set of baseline, has that user ever had a need to access that file with those credentials before?
That file would have been used by every logon from Active Directory.
But that's
Yes,
behavior
but
and
based on
capability.
behavior, but based on behavior, they would have accessed it at logon. Would they have any need to access that at non-logon times, based on that user?
Probably not, actually.
But should
Bingo,
they-
there's a
Behavior-
direction.
But should they
Behavior
have been
analytics might have
authorized
set up.
to have access to that?
They were authorized.
They were access
But
to have
should
read.
they have authorized?
They were have access to have read authorized.
Yes.
Yes.
They should have been authorized to access that file. There should not have been credentials within inside of that. As a syslog GPO or a syslog script that gets executed as part of a GPO or as part of a logon script, that should have been executed on startup by a user via a GPO or a startup routine. However, the ability for that user to gain credentials outside of that logon and leverage those as a interactive logon through an RDP session or a remote logon, that should have been detected. That could have been detected by behavior analytics.
Should have been.
Could have.
Could have been and should have
Shoulda,
been.
woulda, coulda.
If you're not doing behavior analytics these days, I'm sorry, it's table stakes.
I mean,
And
you're still.
O365 has the distinct capability and integrated capability to do this at the E3, E5 license level very, very well. In fact, this is like a non-nomenclature for anything that is set up for anybody at the base level for default for E3 or E5 login. Again, this comes back to good AD behavior, good Azure AD analytics, and default Microsoft like security protections. Again,
You still
are
have the
not
problem that
AD.
there was credentials in a PowerShell script on a open share.
100%.
I'm
Like
just saying.
the ability for an attacker to leverage something that is default inherently is a conditional behavior that someone is going to leverage. This is something that obviously is used by IT, by admins, by login script. This is something that is leveraged. So you can't tell the difference between people using this and people not using this because this is default behavior. This
But
is bad default
what
behavior.
I find interesting though about that, Tyler, is that in that whole kind of unpacking is that we still have this perimeter, right? 20 years ago, it was the perimeter that we tried to define with our firewall.
It was the DMZ
Yeah.
at this point.
Today,
Like SAS is in the DMZ.
Right, and we always said there was
Let's
that.
say 25 years ago. Just,
Sure,
just
that-
to humor me.
There was
Just
that
to be
crunchy.
clear.
There was that crunchy outside and that soft, squishy inside.
Side,
But we
yep.
still have this today. But the pseudo crunchy outside are the protections that we have for our identities and our users with authentication and
I'm
authorization.
glad you brought that up because that's where I wanted to go with the Uber conversation. I mean, I have recently gone back to doing PCI as a QSA, and it was last year when it was virtual because it was COVID in the last year and a half. I was doing a virtual, over the shoulder, monitoring, looking at how they're doing stuff. And we had a network administrator for this particular client, and I wanted him to log into the network device, firewall, appliance type of thing. And I watched him open up Notepad to a file that had all the passwords to all the different systems. And I'm like, I can't did I just see what I'm seeing? And he did it twice. So yes.
No, I mean,
But
you come back
this
to
is laziness.
behavior.
You know, this is the conversation I have about laziness with my teenage son.
But it's not laziness. It's
But,
it's
hold on.
it is lazy, but it's also okay.
Hold
go ahead.
on, hold
Go
on.
ahead, Bob. It's your show. Go ahead,
But I
Bob.
think there's different paradigms and levels of laziness. And my son would define laziness as, well, I don't sit around all day and to drink beer and not do anything. I'm like, but you can be lazy about certain things.
Oh, sure.
Right? So he'll be lazy in like not wanting to make multiple trips while carrying stuff, but in the process, like drop something, spill something, and or break something because he doesn't want to make multiple trips. I'm like, well, that's laziness. And he'll be like, oh, I'm not lazy. Like, I don't sit around all day and do nothing. Like,
Yeah.
I go to school and I come home and I work on the yard and all that stuff. I'm like, but we have to define what laziness is.
Yeah.
I think security is the same thing. I'm not security lazy because I enforce multi-factor authentication and I do logging and I look at sysmon, but like on the inside, yeah, I am kind of lazy in that. Like, I leave credentials in a PowerShell script. And look, I'm not knocking Uber.
Lackadaisical.
Like, yeah,
is
dude, I am not knocking Uber for that in any way, shape, form, or fashion, because like I've totally got like like all of us are like, yeah, I kind of got credentials like stored in the script somewhere.
I totally have credentials in my Evernote notebook.
It was just
but-
totally like I've
But
got
that's
credit-
based on an idea, and this goes back 1,000 years. I've done talks on this where, when we first started doing, and we used to call it internet security. We have a network, you have connected systems, and now you're plugging into this this universal backbone. But there was always this presumption of the perimeter security. We used to call it the crunchy exterior, and the chewy interior.
The condom, the cesspool.
But again, it boils down to, why are you on Tyler when I'm talking? There you go.
So, but we're going back. We're going back about 1,000 years, right when you were born.
Yes, but the notion is you establish a secure perimeter, and what goes on the inside is you can do what you do.
It can be really
because it's
transparent.
protected.
It can be transparent on the interior.
And that's
so
been
you were saying is
blown up
you
in
would
the
march
middle.
your troops in a straight line with their muskets.
Well, no, I know. I did a talk one
But
time.
that's not even 1,000 years ago. Paul.
I've got an aerial photograph of some city, I think it's in Italy, where it's just concentric rings of here's the castle where the king or the lord of the manor is, and then there's
Sure.
you can see
Napoleon
the
was
layers
in
of
the middle.
protection.
Yeah, so you got
It's
rings-
defense in depth.
So you've got
away,
rings
or I
here.
will fought in your general direction.
Your father was a hamster, and your mother smelled of elderberries.
And I think
If you don't go away, I'll taunt you a second timer.
I think it's a fallacy. Those of us that came out of the DoD where InfoSec was our business and that's all we did, and I'm blaming myself as much as anybody. We came out into the private sector and started preaching how you do security, and we would talk about how you don't want to do the crunchy exterior. You still have to protect the interior, but everybody largely embraced. Well, as long as we can't keep people in, if we can keep people out. I've had too much of that booze. From the interior, what we do on the interior, we can kind of do whatever we want to do.
We still have that mentality. That's my point. We still have that mentality.
I'm agreeing with it. We still have that mentality. I think that's what I saw in the Uber hack.
Yeah.
Once they got the penetration.
But Twitter as well. A lot of these big companies that are getting popped, right? That's what we still see, and I think that's a culture thing. That's a security mindset thing. I think you probably don't see that as much in security teams in organizations that really truly collaborate and are really serious about security and communicate. They embody security from like all the different levels, from outside in. Like, it doesn't matter where. Like, we need to maintain control and access to all of our credentials, our data, because that's what security really is.
Yeah, but
right?
but I tell you, I've been in.
We don't see that very often, though.
We don't see it often, and I've been working with many organizations where the public perception is, well, they're this company, surely they do all the things right, and Uber's a recent example. But once you get past that perimeter protection, they're just as bad on the inside as everybody else.
and
I don't fault them because everybody does it that way.
And I think about that, and like we think about many companies nowadays that are taking venture capital and so forth, and are taking advice from the board about, hey, like, you know, the bottom line is to the shareholders or to the venture capital holders, and, you know, bring this thing to market fast. We can make money. And, you know, traditional, like, we forgot about security completely, or we didn't forget about it, but we realized that shit, like, if we're going to bring this to market, we're going to make some money, we're going to have a successful exit, we got to look sideways about a couple
but
things.
I think it comes down to, in most circumstances, that the security has to be holistic. There has to be that holistic approach to security.
And
if you don't have that, you're gonna assume some inherent risk, whether that's a company or whether that's an application. And it's kind of interesting. Like my story number 7, if you dig into that, they talk about
kudos for trying to tie another story in.
Hell yeah.
But they talk about this exact thing that we're talking about, but in software. But I think it also applies to a company as well, right?
Yeah.
Like they realized in the Chrome web browser that they've got a pretty large attack surface in like the browser renderer aspect of the application. Like back to our JavaScript example, like basically attackers can run code in there and they can find some juicy exploits and vulnerabilities in that sector. But when they've got to break out of the sandbox, like it kind of is like a funnel. It squishes down. And Google, I think to their credit, is not going like, we don't want to leave that juicy exterior, right? Like we do want to have the funnel, but like we don't want to leave it all, like give it a field day to be able to execute anything you want in the browser renderer portion of it. So we want to secure that point, but we also want to limit where they can go from that in the sandboxing aspect. And I don't know if this was something that Google created or whether this, and this gets extremely friggin' nerdy, right? So this is memory corruption vulnerabilities, specifically a use after free vulnerability. I mean, this has been documented. Good Lord. I mean, we could date this way back, right? But the fundamental C programming, it exists in other languages, but primarily C programming vulnerability use after free. And they were looking at it more holistic kind of way, in that what if we were to limit how we can squash this one particular memory corruption vulnerability, and they chose a specific method to do that and have implemented it inside of Chrome. And essentially the way it works is if you free the memory that you once reserved, right, they basically put a counter around that. So that you couldn't use memory after it was freed, because that leads to vulnerabilities and crashes within the application. So at a high level, and I'm not the best person to explain this, you can go read the article. And if you're more familiar with C programming, I'm really rusty. You probably get a better understanding of it. But like essentially they create a counter.
All the code that everybody's using today was originally written in C.
Correct.
Just saying.
Hey, but C's going away. Like, to be fair, Mark Razinovich said that C should be replaced by
I want to get there too, Tyler. But so again, essentially, they implement a pointer system that implements a counter to prevent the use after C. I put the description in there. That's probably a really bad way to describe it.
That'll fix it all.
High level, yeah. But to your point, Tyler, what's interesting, C we've always picked on as having these vulnerabilities. And I do believe there are other languages that have a much better way to allow you to still have much of the same functionality, but in a safer perspective. And it's interesting. There are, for example, implementations of UEFI in, is it Rust? I think it's Rust, right? Rust being a more safer language in memory management, implementing the UEFI BIOS, which traditionally have been implemented in C. You can look at the Tyano Core and EDK2 implementations, as well as Core Boot, all implementations in C. Implementing that in a different language, some feel that could have certain security benefits. I think there, Tyler, to your point, there might be some validity to that. No?
Let me know when kernel drivers get written in Rust, and let me know when assembly is no longer needed. and I will 100% hop on board that bandwagon. Until then, rootkits and C implementations of C2 is going to always happen. Mark, when you start to write sysinternals in Rust, I will be all on board and think you're not full of shit.
Wow.
But I also want to point out something that I think I put on my Twitter feed too, is that like C was meant to be run and not read. And that's some of my struggles.
That is Perl. Let's be
that's
clear.
also Perl. I'd argue that's also C. I won't disagree that that's Perl. But myself, like, I'm not coding in C on a daily basis. I mean, there was a time when I did code in C, but then like you get away from that, and now I have to go look at these examples of disassemblers
like
that are spitting out C code, and I'm like,
the bane of my
God,
C programming limited experience: indirect pointers.
yeah.
That's all like coding.
This shit
You
is
code
hard.
in
Like,
C and they're like, what is everybody doing? I don't even know what anybody's doing anymore because no one codes in C. Like,
right,
but
also Tyler, like if you're looking at like the disassembly of C, where your variable names are kind of like randomized, and like that makes it even. That's like another level of complexity. Let alone like reading actual C code that someone writes is hard, but reading a disassembly is even harder.
Yeah, good luck.
Like, I want to know how this is implemented in UEFI. Oh, well, like just go read the core boot source code. Like, oh, okay. Yeah, like, sure. Let me get right on that. Like, that won't take me a year or 10 to understand how that's written. Anyway.
So,
I do applaud Google for implementing this method, because I will admit I did not explain it all that well, but I think it's really cool. Lee actually explained it way better. Unfortunately, I couldn't be here. Lee explained it way better than I could.
Oh, wait a minute. Tyler has guests.
2 guests show up. Look at that.
Hey,
And
say hi to Hannah. It's Hannah's birthday.
you got a Hannah? Oh, my Hannah.
That's Mr. Jeff's Hannah.
My Hannah.
Tyler's been invaded.
So speaking of,
Are those all yours, Tyler? Or is your daughter having a sleepover, or?
One of those was white, one of those was brown. So the brown one is definitely mine.
Wow. All right. Yeah, clearly. Never mind.
Are we good?
Speaking of invasions,
Hell no! You don't get to come back on the show after being absent for 9 months and tell me we're going to end, Jeff.
No, let's keep going. But
so here, to put between both of you, one last story. I think we should probably round it out.
Oh no, we got a couple of stories.
No.
Yeah,
We've got one story.
Jeff has to pee though.
to round us out.
Cover a boring one while Jeff pees.
we can keep going forever. But I need to pee.
Jeff needs to pee. Let him
He's
pee.
got to pee. All right.
Let's quick talk about
one
NVIDIA.
story for Jeff to pee, and then
this
we'll
is
hit
a
the
great,
round
hold on,
out.
but this is a great segue from our previous story. NVIDIA is working to make Linux safer for cars, robots, and other safety critical equipment.
Until they get hacked by what group?
But this is very similar to Google.
LAPSUS.
But this is similar to Google's effort to like squash all use after free bugs. NVIDIA is working to, let's see, I quote, address space isolation approach is around asynchronous detection of unsafe events to block it before it happens. Their approach involves MMU-based memory coloring and is outlined more in the details of their slides.
It's racist.
No, it's not racist.
That's the white versus brown thing, Tyler.
It's something I want to look more into, but it's about like, I think the coloring is about marking areas of memory and like ranking them and preventing access to protected areas of memory. And this ties into actually my recent post, because like the most protected areas of memory is where it's called SMRAM, right? Where the most protected code for the code that runs your SMI handlers is run in SMRAM. So it gets into memory protections and all of that stuff. In doing that in support of the Linux kernel, so they can run in a safer environment. And I really want to unpack this more. But in Google and I think someone else, and now NVIDIA, is actually working to like mold the Linux kernel to provide a safer environment to run more mission critical stuff, which I think is pretty cool. Also,
isn't everybody doing that though?
What's that, Tyler?
We should all be doing that in kernel space.
We should. But like the Linux attack surface, man, is the more I learn about Linux and the more squishy it is. One of the smartest people I ever worked with probably 10 years ago, was like, Paul, like, I know you love Linux. He's like, I love Linux too. He's like, but security-wise, man, there's stuff that people have uncovered that goes not talked about, and there's so much other stuff that has not gone uncovered. Like, it is not a secure environment at all. And I think since that time I've had that conversation with that person, I've witnessed like probably over 100 different vulnerabilities and like exactly what he was talking about. And so like that's why when I look at people like NVIDIA working to make it safer, I'm like, we still got a work cut out for us. Think about the Linux kernel. Like, how many tens of millions of lines of code are in the Linux kernel that we have to secure, independent of the device drive? Like,
but it's open source. Everybody's looking at it.
Five people looking at
but no one's looking at that
capable.
low level code. No one's looking at that and going. I mean, some people are, but not enough.
Qualys
Qualys is looking at it. Sure. Anyway, someone got.
I'm not looking at that. Let's be real.
I'm not looking at that either.
No one is.
I'm just trying to make my Linux systems work, let alone like looking at all the source code to make sure there's
that
no vulnerability.
DBX is getting updated. That's it.
That's it. That's it.
Because clearly it's the year of the desktop and for Linux, right?
Someone got an unexplained $250,000 payment from Google. This person was part of their bug bounty program, and I would
all
imagine,
day.
like,
I want this guy's job all day. Like, he's just sitting
so
there.
this
Like,
dude was
hey,
just sitting there, right? Like, probably got paid out some other bug bounties, right? So his ACH transfer account was like hooked up with Google, right? Like, they had his account number. He was set up for ACH transfer because Kari was set up in their system, and they
sitting
accidentally
there waiting.
read through the article. Like, what happened was basically Google accidentally sent him $250,000, and he was like,
Are they going to take it back though? Like, at this point, like,
that's the
from a
problem. He
PR
can't,
standpoint-
like, when you get to that scale of a company, like, to get all
like
the
a dime.
It's generally cheaper to let them just keep it.
Wow.
but then he has to pay taxes on it.
Yep.
This is where we need Sam. This is where we need Sam to win. Like,
you
how
ever
do I pay taxes on
free
income,
money?
on income that I earned for not services that were provided?
Can you?
Yeah,
like,
I'm
who
crying. He clears 150, 180K.
Yeah, who cares if you're paying taxes on free money? Like,
Pay the taxes on it. Yeah, I think that's a great point, Larry. Just be like, you know what? It was income. I'll pay the taxes on it. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Like, even if it's income, it's taxed differently from capital gains. So,
Sure.
I mean, whatever you're gonna pay the taxes on,
who cares?
pay 40%.
40%.
You remember?
Sure.
You remember the
Let's
movie
go.
Office Space where
Wait, what? Half
Yes.
1%?
Yeah.
where Norman had actually been fired like a year before, and he was still working and he was still
Yep.
getting paid. I actually worked for a company one time. When I left, they kept paying me for like 3 months.
Did you get to keep the red stapler or not?
Stapler was mine, and they eventually called me and said, "Hey, can we have all our money back? We weren't supposed to pay you." I'm like, about that.
About that.
And
That was
I'm
my
like,
bonus. What are you talking about?
Well, I said, there was this bonus that you didn't pay me, so how about I pay you back everything minus the bonus that I was
And by the way, you still owe me $1,000.
And they were like, okay. And that, I mean, but when you hold the money, you have all the power.
Yeah.
Yes. Correct.
And they were like, yeah, okay.
I didn't read the article, but from what the title said, like, or from what you expounded in the article, is like basically he held on to it, expecting Google to take it back he was very much in tune. It seemed like he was very much in tune with what he had done and what he expected to get paid.
But like backsies on ACH transfers aren't a thing. Like that's,
they're not. But he probably expected Google to reach out to say, "Hey, we screwed up."
They haven't taken the article. When I read the article, Google hadn't taken it back, but they had acknowledged that it was a mistake and are going to take it back, but it's taking some time. And he's like, well, like, how long does this like, I'm going to have to move it to a different account. What he said is I'm going to have to move it to a different account to avoid paying taxes on it, which, like, what are you going to move it to your offshore account to avoid paying? I don't understand.
Too bad. It's already
There's
there.
some accounning like weirdness going on with this article.
I mean, if you got to pay taxes on it and Google's not going to take it back, like, me ethically, I say, well, that great, the money's mine. Google, if you're going to take it back and I'm paying taxes on it, you're going to pay me. You're going to reimburse me for those taxes because it was your screw up, not mine. Like, that's the ethical thing to do. And what?
But ironically, sometimes the ethical thing to do is more costly than just.
Agreed.
Wow, 250,000 may cross that. I mean, if it was
but
10,
we're talking Google.
Yeah,
right.
but still.
And Google, like, if they've got to pay this dude $100,000 in taxes for something that they screwed up on, and now it's a $350,000 mistake to
$10.
Google, like,
$10. Like, look
Yeah.
at the calculation. $10.
yeah.
Trojanized versions of putty. This one was
Putty, putty,
interesting.
Oh, that was
putty,
an
putty,
interesting one. Yeah.
Wait,
This one's interesting because, like, basically
Who uses putty anymore?
I'm literally going to sit here and do putty.
Okay, but like
putty.
to Tyler's
'Cause-
point,
putty, putty,
WSL,
putty, putty,
right?
putty,
Like
putty.
you got WSL, so you shouldn't need putty,
Putty.
right?
But
Putty,
if you use
putty, putty,
WSL
putty,
and
putty.
you use putty,
But the
Putty,
ruse
putty, putty.
was like, hey,
Putty,
we want
putty.
you to apply for a job here,
Putty, putty, putty.
so we're going to use. Was it WhatsApp? Yeah, we're going to use WhatsApp to send you like this text file that tells you how to log in.
Hey,
And
Don
then-
Weber.
And then we're going to use putty. But we're going to send you the instructions on how to log in along with the putty client. And I'm like, if I'm applying for a job, like, isn't part of the job that I know how to SSH and log into your system? Like, I don't need your putty. Like, I have an SSH client, whatever.
you have your putty.
You have your putty. I have my putty. I don't want your putty. I want my putty or WSL, or I've got a Linux box on my that I'm going to use regular. Okay, next story.
No, dude, it is literally one of
I'll
those
bring
things.
my own SSH
My bad,
software.
man.
Is my
Inside
point.
joke.
It's a total inside joke, and it's an industry thing that if you like do some stupid connection to putty or with putty, it literally says on the screen over and over again, putty.
Yeah, this one didn't say that. It just
A few clients we've done some IR on have said putty.
Putty.
This one doesn't say that. It just pwns your system.
Putty.
Much like if you're a gamer on YouTube, Redline malware. So you
Dude, Redline's no joke. though.
Redline's no
Redline
joke, man. Like,
practices.
so it hacks gamers' YouTube accounts, posts videos with cheats for games, provides a link in the description to said cheats, which really just downloads malware to propagate the malware to put YouTube videos on your account.
Fucking
that
brilliant.
puts links to get more people. Like, it's basically a
Fucking
worm.
brilliant.
I mean, it is it's a worm that compromises YouTube gamers, that promotes. The cheats don't work because the cheats are really just malware. Like, it's
Brilliant.
it's brilliant. Actually,
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Like this is I totally screwed up the socials, like Discord, TikTok, like, oh yeah, like this is taking advantage of new
Yes.
distribution methods for the worm to do these things that
This is not the beginning of this though. Like we've seen this before, like from a Raccoon, Vicor, all of the the Steelers we're talking about for Uber. These
Yeah.
are the exact same malware and browser implementations that are leveraging these.
But this is YouTube's fault because it's really hard to create a new YouTube channel that gains traction. So like attackers have to go.
1,000 subscribers in order to do live, right?
Yeah.
Like you.
So
talk about
attackers
how-
are like, I got to go after someone who already has an established YouTube
Yes.
account in order to get stuff on YouTube in order to scam people. That's basically
100%.
like what fueled this attack, which is kind of interesting. In terms of like crap that we don't care about, because we have to at least cover one story about an attack that we don't care about. Lens reflections may betray your secrets in Zoom video calls. I worry about this like all the time because like
look at your lens, look at your glasses right now.
I've worn glasses for a number of years now to be able to see my screen. Like
Looking
there was
at
a
Lee,
point,
at Lee. Where's Lee at?
but no, there was a point where it was around 40 years old that I was like, I can't see my screen. Like I'm wearing these gunner glasses and I'm like making the font really big. I'm holding my phone like
Time for the bifocals.
Like I got pretty long arms. Like I got freakishly long arms.
Progressive lenses.
Yeah.
Yes,
Larry.
progressives are bifocals,
Yeah, I got.
depending.
Yeah, I have
Progressive
those
lenses.
too. But I'm like, I
Thanks,
need,
Jeff.
I need some readers, right? So I got readers, and I was like, like I can see the screen. This
Readers.
is amazing,
and
right?
so can everybody else.
And then, but like a lot of us have really nice cameras at home. Like
Yep.
10, not just the 720 pieces of crap that come with your laptop, but we have nice cameras. And like I look at my video, and I'm like
Like right now.
yeah, I'm like I can see my screen in my glasses, and I'm always worried about that.
Reminds me of a
Password
story.
Manager.
Yeah, my story number 19.
No, reminds me of a story that I would like to tell.
Oh, okay. So, but what do they say in the research before you get to your story? A variety of factors can affect the legibility of text reflected in the video. These include reflectant based on the meeting participant's skin color, environmental, screen bright, blah, 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 right? Like there's a lot of variables in how well you're able to read the screen through your glasses. Like what I garnered from this article is like, don't browse porn while you have glasses on, because you can tell the difference between porn and not porn in the reflection of your. So the last
somewhat related to my story. And
so when the goal was to identify just a specific website on the screen of a video meeting participant from eyeglass reflection, the success rate rose to 94% among the Alexa top 100 websites, which basically, from the reflection, you can tell what kind of website you were on. So, like, if you're browsing porn and a reflection in your glasses, people can totally tell, even on a 720p video.
Right, and like even thinking about that, like, I may have been on Zoom calls where, in fact, someone has shared a rather dirty meme in another channel and that type of stuff, and I've switched over, and I'm like, I got to be careful about where the reflection of my glasses.
You got to adjust the angle on your camera. Because
I've lived with glasses my entire life. I'm like knowing, like going into pictures and so forth, that like the reflection off these things is a thing, and now they can see pictures. So,
Jeff, your story.
So my story is, and this goes back to my NSA days. This was in the 80s.
Here it comes. Love you, Jeff.
There was a secretary in the office where I worked who got married. You know, she went on her honeymoon to the Poconos.
Yeah, that's what you did back then.
And if you're in, Poconos, they have these rooms with the heart-shaped tub.
Like Bahamas? Is that like Bahamas? Poconos?
Kind of.
And it was on the honeymoon. It was called the Poca Yeses.
But she came back into the office, after the honeymoon, and she's passing around photographs, and eventually I'm looking at the stack, and these are like photos that were printed.
This is the 80s.
This is the 80s, so they're actually 3x5 or
she went to a film photomat. Yeah.
So I'm looking through these photos, and at some point there's these pictures where they're showing each other in the heart-shaped tub that's all filled with bubbles and everything, and like oh look, this is us in the tub. But
and the mirror
behind the tub is wall-to-wall mirrors, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, hey, I'm not going to say her name.
Please.
Sally. I'm guessing when you were taking these pictures, you were both in the tub and you took turns getting out, so you were both probably naked. Have you considered the fact that there was mirrors behind you? Because I'm looking at. There's Sally, and the reflection in the mirror.
Yep. And clearly this is the 1970s, so
Bob.
there wasn't a lot of trimming going on.
It was the 80s. There was no trimming. And I'm like,
no trimming. Yeah.
She's like, what are you talking about? She looked at me like, holy. She's like, nobody saw the picture. But she was like, I was not the first person to see these photos.
People selling stuff on eBay of mirrors, and they're taking pictures in the mirrors completely buck naked.
You see a lot of memes about that today. With people,
Well, it's not a new thing, but it's still a thing.
Yeah,
it's still a thing.
Yeah, but it is very lens reflections, and I don't think this is anything. I don't think that you'll be able to read someone's what I garnered from the article is like you're not gonna be able to skim passwords or whatever from that.
Just wait.
But they did say like 4K you could read more on the screen.
Sure.
So
you may be able to determine which EDR they're using, which SIM platform they're monitoring.
Yeah, exactly. Identify the website
that they are watching at that point in time.
Or just even seeing, what toolbar, what do they have open?
Like,
what do they have
we take this back to
Johnny. Are they using Chrome? Are they using
OSINT?
Yep. You talk back to Johnny Long's no tech hacking stuff, and like if you can see what over their shoulder, what stuff is running in their taskbar and what applications are running and all those types of things. Like, but now it's not over the shoulder. It's not over the shoulder.
Fingerprinting goes a long way, man.
Yep. It's not over the shoulder. It's through the glasses. For the reflection.
Now, a lot of us are into 3D printing.
Yep.
And a lot of us love our meat. I love my meat. I mean,
I know you do. Speaking
of, where are the meat candles?
We have a meat scented candle. I love I love some good barbecue, right? But there is such a thing as 3D printed steak. An Israeli company has unveiled lab grown beef chunks. They actually use, so the article says, as opposed to being sourced from slaughtering livestock, the beef for these morsels is derived from starter cells or stem cells
Yep.
of the animal
Yep.
that are left to grow in a petri dish
Yep.
under human-made conditions. And they're actually taking the stem cells, funneling it through like a 3D printer, and like printing steak. Now, it's not like
So it's the ink.
no.
Yeah.
It is
Well,
the ink, but so it's a great question, Jeff. So like, you're not just like 3D printing an entire steak, but you're running it through essentially a 3D printer, and then you have to let it the stem cells have to grow.
Stitch it all
after
back
that.
together.
Yeah, so the stem cells grow the fat and muscles that would make up a steak. And these stem
Holistic
cells,
hot dogs.
yes,
holistic
the stem, it's not hot dogs, it's actually beef. So it's fat and muscle it's stem cells from a cow, dude. Like they actually
Hot
take
dog.
stem
And
they
I
take
feel
a
like
blood-
this solves world
and-
hunger, and yet
Tyler,
it doesn't.
Tyler,
Well-
the stem cells don't just grow into lips and buttholes; they grow into other parts of the cow.
fat
Shoulder,
no,
back.
Yeah.
fat- no, they grow
Hol-
into fat and
holistic
muscle.
hot dog.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
they're able to isolate to grow actual fat.
the whole hot dog.
I think this is fascinating. Fat and muscle from
It's fascinating and disturbing all
Yes,
at the
it
same
is.
time.
well,
I really hope they figure this out at a scale in which we can solve world hunger, because for the love of God, like, why are we in 2022 and we don't have world hunger solved? Like, we're pre-printing hot dog.
Yeah. Speaking,
the article. I mean, the article's in there, and there is very much a great debate over, like the greenhouse or like environmental impacts. And
and not to,
I'm very much like a data person, and I don't know that there's enough data to support one side of the argument or another. Right?
and,
Like,
you know, and
like
not
there's
to-
a very natural process.
and not to mention any of the social political issues with stem cells and any of that.
Yeah,
kind of
sure.
stuff.
Like, but that aside, like, what's the
Catholic Church can
but what's the
just
most
take a side
environmentally
and
friendly way? Like, you think about scaling this 3D printing process and its effects on the environment.
Yep.
And the effects on the environment of raising actual cattle. When I read the article, I was like, there's not enough evidence, in my opinion, to be able to support it
Like,
either
yeah,
way.
how do you get the power to support the 3D printers while you harvest cow farts?
You do it the
in
whole
methane, like-
but like methane is part of the. There was a Joe Rogan interview that went into like all the like details of like creating vegan or vegetarian friendly food versus like meat friendly food, and there's
So
gotta-
for the record, so you can use this at home. Scientific studies were conducted that inhaling small amounts of methane were actually beneficial to your health. So
Right.
that next time you Dutch oven your wife, you can say, "I'm just doing it because I care about your health and I love you."
no, I get it. And I'm not like
So
I'm not an expert
is-
in this area,
is-
but like
Is 3D printed meat vegan?
no, well, that's a great question, Jeff.
Yeah,
Like,
that's a
because
great question.
it is stem cells
From an actual cow.
An actual cow, I would say no. There are other methods where they were able to create, like, air quotes, meat that doesn't derive from this. The article goes into it. It was a pretty good article, like going into all aspects of that and kind of debating is it environmentally friendly? Is it not? I mean, I love the environment. I think we should work to preserve our environment, but like I also think that you got to go where the data leads you, right? And like again, Larry, to your point, like political things kind of get in the way of like, is this environmentally friendly or not?
And
I think it would be pretty cool. To Tyler's point, like, you know, to solve hunger and all that stuff. Like, could we print healthy
I don't
healthy
think
foods?
hungry people in Uganda care if it's fucking vegan or not.
Yeah.
No, but that's true. But like, you don't want to destroy the environment. Going, oh, I can 3D print a steak, and this is great for the environment when it's a fucking horrible thing for the environment. Because, like Larry said,
Batteries and electric cars
where are
are
you
horrible
pulling the
for the
power
environment.
from?
Let's be weird.
What
Like,
emissions are happening when you're doing the 3D printing? Like, you know, the whole thing.
in the effort of time. Speaking of moving us along and solving world hunger and
Uganda's hungry people
and 3D
Is this
printing
what-
and
is
3D
this what we're
printing
talking
meat.
about- Is this we're talking about dildos and lube?
Yeah, 3D printing meat and solving world hunger. If you're wondering where, and to tie this into security about single points of failure, and so forth and so on, in Oklahoma City, specifically, a semi carrying a single load of packages for.
I thought this was last week.
Allegedly, dildo
No.
of the month club.
No, get this.
Crashed.
This is a headline that I saw. I don't remember.
Well,
I don't remember
lot
where I
of
saw
headlines.
this. I don't remember where I saw this headline, but I saw this headline. The headline is wrecked semi shoots load of dildos and lube all over I-40.
And all I can think of is Paul and Larry. That's all I thought about.
But like, here's the thing: someone wrote that headline and is like giggling, like probably like every other day, going like, "I wrote that headline."
And even better, and in the article they said the accident prompted rubberneckers of.
They show a picture. Is that the actual picture
Yep.
of?
Yes.
Yep.
Wow.
And the zoom in is of there's dildos and lube all over the highway.
I guess you would put that if it was shipping from the same manufacturer. You would put that in the same load.
Supply chain
Same
attack.
load. Same load.
And if it spills, that's what ends up on the highway.
Yep. You spill your load all over the highway, and then you.
I'm pretty sure there's a biblical mandate not to spill your load on the highway. Just saying.
I'm just going back to like on September 15th of this year, someone wrote the headline, wrecked semi shoots loads of dildos and lube all over I-40. Someone wrote that and got it published. Like, that's impressive, dude. Like, that's
a hacker.
a hacker, right? Like, that's amazing. That's
And it wasn't you two.
So even better, like there was a rollover involving a semi-tractor and a box truck and a Mustang. Like, does that have anything to do with the size of the
So
dildos?
a semi and a tractor and a Mustang went into a bar. It sounds like a joke.
Yeah.
It's that's got to be one of the best headlines I may have ever
And all those
read in my
damn
entire
rubberneckers.
life. So the opening line of the article: if your commute along I-40 was a bit slippery yesterday, this explains why. Like, this had to be the most fun article for this author. Who wrote this? Patrick. That's all
They've
we
been
get.
waiting
His
their
first
whole
name.
career
Dude,
for this
Patrick,
article.
like, you're my hero for like writing this article.
Yep.
Like,
And oh boy, did chopper pilot Jim Gardner deliver after you gave a brief, vague description of the update scene. Intrigued morning anchor Lacey Lowry asked what cargo the truck was carrying and specifically said, "What's all over the road?" And after an awkward pause, someone bashful, Jim started just raining around the question. The cameraman zoomed in.
yeah, like, how do you get around the fact that there's rubber penises and
Dildos?
lube all over the high? It's just one of the. I don't even know if it's
50-gallon
real.
drums. Let's be real.
I just want
Like
to. I
the
just want to
VA
believe
Max.
it's real because someone had to write this article. That's just amazing.
Like we talk about crashes and some of the stuff lately. Like there was crash of a tractor trailer truck carrying like Alfredo sauce, and another one of regular marinara sauce, and like, are they competing? And then you talk about the crash of like, there was an armored truck carrying money and it crashed on the highway and people stopped by and scooped up money. Like, are people stopping at these crashes and like scooping up marinara? And are they scooping up
or
Alfredo?
dildos?
And are they scooping up lube and dildos? Inquiring minds want to know.
You could just see this. It's like
Were those serial numbers registered in their asset inventory?
And were they
that they
IoT
know whether or not
dildos?
those dildos were illegally acquired?
Are they? Can
just
they?
think of people like getting on the highway, like slipping on lube, falling everywhere, and there's dildos and lube like all over the highway. Like,
I brought you a present, honey.
it is just the most
Promise it's legit.
crazy
And-
story I've ever seen.
Are they-
It might be the most crazy story I've ever seen.
Are they internet connected dildos? And do they have serial numbers? And can we revoke the certificates for said dildos for the stolen
Right?
ones?
Like, are these stolen ones accurate?
So are the
they
dildos
asset
hardware or
inventory?
firmware?
They're clearly not software.
Not if they want to sell them.
Oh shit! You have to press the pump a couple
That
times.
bottle
to go
is
from-
still
think that's
cool.
it.
I will
There is
mention.
no
the
way
bottle-
we can top that. There is
that's it.
no way we can top that exchange. Larry, thank you, everyone.
No, they go from software to hardware if you pump the button a couple of times.
Over and
Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
And I'm so sorry. If you didn't understand some of that, ask Grandpa to explain it to you. Over and out!